north-south and east-west, and a coordinated approach in dealing with this pandemic?
Minister.
I'd strongly endorse the words of my honourable friend. This government is determined to work together with the Northern Irish Executive and the Irish Government to ensure that measures safeguard the health and well-being of UK and Irish citizens. There is an existing Memorandum of Understanding between Northern Ireland and Ireland Chief Medical Officers which formalises coordination and cooperation between the Irish Government and the Northern Ireland Executive in relation to COVID-19. And the Secretary of State continues to hold regular discussions with the First and Deputy First Minister as well as the Irish Government to cooperate on COVID issues.
Let's head back to Northern Ireland with Paul Girvin. Paul Girvin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With the positive news that the UK will commence COVID-19 vaccinations from the 14th of December, will the Secretary of State commit that if logistical support from Her Majesty's Armed Forces is required in Northern Ireland, this will be provided speedily and with the same resources as the rest of our nation? And Mr Speaker, I'd just like to take a little bit of a liberty, and it's I would like to take this opportunity to express my deep disappointment that once again the six-time world superbike champion and Southampton native Jonathan Ray MBE was overlooked for the short list of the BBC Sports Personality of the Year, and I'm sure the Secretary of State will agree with me on that.
The Minister might as well.
Well,
Minister.
indeed, I fear to tread in such contentious area. But I say to the honourable gentleman, he's absolutely right that the news on a vaccine is good news for the whole United Kingdom, and we want to make sure that it is rolled out effectively across the whole of the United Kingdom, and we shall certainly make representations to ensure that that includes Northern Ireland.
15, please.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Government continues to be committed to integrated education in Northern Ireland, which is why we provided £500 million of funding to the Northern Ireland Executive for the development of integrated and shared schools as part of the Fresh Start Agreement. The Executive has confirmed that they have so far spent £31 million to the end of 1920, and the full £500 million of Fresh Start capital has been committed out to the end of 25-26. We want to see investment delivered quickly in Northern Ireland, and the establishment of an independent fiscal council would support the Assembly to hold the Executive to account on delivery, as well as on other fiscal and budgetary matters.
Mr Speaker, who we learn with and live alongside could scarcely be more fundamental to how we actually see the world. And integrated education is one of the major unfulfilled legacies of the Good Friday Agreement. Isn't it time to seize that opportunity now, presented by the New Decade, New Approach deal, and together drive real progress on shared education that will build a fairer society?
Minister.
I think the short answer to the honourable gentleman's question is yes.
Shadow Minister Curran.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last March, I was pleased to host the Integrated Education Fund here in Westminster. We had a very positive cross-party discussion with the fund about how we all support our shared desire to ensure every child in Northern Ireland gets a good education in a good school. Good progress is being made despite the pandemic on the ground with the parties to support children. Will the Secretary of State and the Minister really commit to doing all he can to support them in delivering this long overdue legacy work?
Minister.
Well, I agree with the Honourable Lady about the importance of this issue. As she knows, under the New Decade New Approach Agreement, the Executive agreed to establish a programme for government including an enhanced strategic focus and supporting actions on educating our children and young people together in the classroom in order to build a shared and integrated society. I've met with some of the Northern Irish parties to discuss progress on delivering shared and integrated education, and I share their ambition to speed up delivery here. I do believe that the establishment of an independent fiscal council would help to accelerate that case and that delivery.
Virginia Crossman. Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Our commitment to unfettered access for Northern Ireland goods to the rest of the UK, as outlined in NDNA and in the 2019 manifesto, remains unequivocal. We brought forward draft regulations which establish the definition of qualifying Northern Ireland goods, ensuring no changes in how Northern Ireland businesses move goods directly to the rest of the UK from the 1st of January 2021. And the UKIM bill will ensure that qualifying Northern Ireland goods will continue to be placed on the whole UK market, even where the protocol applies different rules in Northern Ireland. Our priority for longer-term qualifying goods regime is to confer the benefits of unfettered access specifically on Northern Ireland businesses. This is being developed in close cooperation with Northern Ireland businesses and the Executive and will come into force in 2021.
Virginia Crossman.
Over 100,000 freight units destined to and from Northern Ireland transit through Holyhead Port each year. Unfettered access is key not only to the Northern Ireland economy but the Anglesey and Welsh economy. Can the Minister confirm that at no stage will this government allow a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and that this is just as important as considering avoiding a tariffs and customs border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK?
Minister Wolff.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I know that her constituency of Innismon plays a vital part in the links between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. The protocol itself was designed to address a particular set of problems in a way that upholds the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. It is a practical solution to avoid a hard border with Ireland whilst ensuring that the UK, including Northern Ireland, leaves the EU as a whole. The protocol is also clear that the UK must function as a single customs territory in practice, and that means fulfilling our commitment to delivering unfettered access for Northern Ireland businesses to the rest of the Great Britain market as well.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number 18.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government remains steadfast in our commitment to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and we will continue to support the institutions in delivering peace and prosperity for the people of Northern Ireland. Of course, a key institution created as a result of the agreement is the Northern Ireland Assembly, which was restored this year following the New Decade New Approach Agreement agreed back in January. The best way forward for Northern Ireland lies in strong, devolved institutions that support the Executive and Assembly to deliver on the issues that matter to the people of Northern Ireland.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Good Friday Agreement comes of age today as 21 years ago it became effective. It provided a platform for the development of excellent economic and social relationships between Northern Ireland and Merseyside. So what conversations has the Secretary of State had to make sure that nothing that happens in the next month puts that progress at risk?
Well, the Honourable Lady makes an excellent point, and says this is exactly what the clauses for the United Kingdom Internal Market Bill are about, is ensuring that those businesses in Northern Ireland continue to trade as part of the United Kingdom with unfettered access, which is of benefit to the companies in Liverpool. So I hope she'll be supporting that when it comes back to this House.
We come to the Shadow Secretary of State, Louise Haigh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week alone, 3 journalists were issued with violent threats by loyalist paramilitaries, and the BBC have seen evidence that loyalist paramilitary groups have over 12,500 members, and there are more dissident groups than during the Troubles. Does the Secretary of State agree that a toxic combination of deprivation and a failure to deal with the legacy of the past have created a fertile breeding ground for paramilitary groups?
Secretary of State.
Well, I would say to the Honourable Lady that I'm sure she would agree with me that obviously there is no place for violence or threats of any description to either to anybody in Northern Ireland, obviously including media and political players in Northern Ireland. It's completely unacceptable. There is no excuse for it, and actually arguing that it's in any way acceptable because of any other particular issue is, I think, a fallacy and the wrong position to take. We have to say are making huge investments. There's been obviously about £20 billion for the Northern Ireland Executive this year between the block grant and the extra support that the UK government has put in, on top of having what are financially the biggest city and growth deals in the United Kingdom, to ensure that we are levelling up, something we are determined to do for the people of Northern Ireland, as we are for the rest of the United Kingdom.
Louise Haigh.
On Monday, the Secretary of State told the House he had ceased engaging on legacy issues at the request of victims' groups, but he knows that the largest cross-community victims group in Northern Ireland, Wave Trauma, have expressed serious concerns at his lack of engagement and indeed have described him as dangerously deluded. Can he confirm to the House exactly when he will meet with Wave Trauma and present an update on legacy proposals to this House?
Secretary of State.
Well, I was a little bit surprised by what the Honourable Lady just outlined, as it was actually the Wave Group who back in March asked us to not to pause on engagement as they were focused and their members were focused on COVID, which I think was a reasonable position. I think it was right as people were focused on COVID. But as I have said a few times to the Honourable Lady and to this House, I think on legacy, which is such a sensitive and important issue, to make sure we can help Northern Ireland move forward and put the troubles in the past, and importantly, get that information for the victims and the families of victims who have been looking for that information now for far too long, is an important thing to do. We're determined to do that by engaging with the people of Northern Ireland, as well as our partners in the Irish government and the United States and the political parties in Northern Ireland. And when we have done that, I will come back to this House. But this has got to be something that is done with the support of and engagement with the people of Northern Ireland.
That completes the questions for Northern Ireland. We're now going to start Prime Minister's questions, and I start with Chris Green.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, today I'm proudly wearing purple to celebrate International Day for Disabled People, which is, of course, tomorrow. Next year, we will publish our national strategy for disabled people, which will be the most ambitious intervention in this area for a generation, putting fairness at the heart of the government's work and levelling up so that everybody has the opportunity to fully to participate in the life of this country. Mr. Speaker, I know that the whole House will want to join me in welcoming the fantastic news that the MHRA has formally authorised the Pfizer vaccine for COVID-19. The vaccine will begin to be made available across the UK from next week. I would like to pay tribute to and to thank all those who have made this possible. It is the protection of vaccines that will ultimately allow us to reclaim our lives and get our economy moving again. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Chris Green.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd like to share the congratulations with the Prime Minister on the creation of this new vaccine and the speed with which it's got out, and to give that congratulations especially to the engineers, technicians and scientists who have delivered it. Now, I believe that we should support the widest distribution and take-up of safe and effective medicines, but does my right friend agree with me that it should always be taken on a wholly voluntary basis by individuals and families?
Prime Minister.
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker. I strongly urge people to take up the vaccine, but it is no part of our culture or our ambition in this country to make vaccines mandatory. That's not how we do things.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, the Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his comments on disabled people? And like the Prime Minister, can I start with the fantastic news about the licensing of a vaccine? This pandemic has caused so much grief and so much loss, but we're now a big step closer to the end of the tunnel. And like the Prime Minister, can I express my thanks, those of everyone in these benches and across the House, to all the scientists who've worked on this and to everybody who's taken part in the trials. Delivering a vaccine fairly, quickly and safely will now be the next major challenge facing the country, and whatever our differences across this House, we've all a duty to play our part in this national effort and to reassure the public about the safety of the vaccine. Mr. Speaker, this morning a priority list has been published for the first phase of the rollout. We understand that around 800,000 doses will soon be available, and that's good news. Because of the 2 doses that will be required, that means 400,000 people can be vaccinated in the first batch. So can the Prime Minister tell the House who does he expect to receive the vaccine next week?
Prime Minister.
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman for his point about the rollout, and let me perhaps just update the House on what the JCVI has concluded so far. And the priority list will be residents in a care home for older adults and their carers to stop transmission. All those 80 years of age and older. Frontline healthcare and social care workers, then all those of 75 years of age and over, then all those of 70 years of age and over, the clinically extremely vulnerable individuals, and then a list that I'm sure the House will want to study closely, but I believe does represent common sense. I think it is very important at this stage for us all to recognise that this is unquestionably good news. It's very, very good news. But it is by no means the end of the story. It is not the end of our national struggle against coronavirus. And that is why it's very important that the package of moderate but tough measures that the House voted for last night, the tiering system, is followed across the country, because that's how we will continue to beat the virus.
Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Prime Minister referenced the priority for the first phase, and as he said, the top 2 priority groups are residents in care homes for older adults and their carers, all those 80 years of age and over, and frontline health and social care workers. Now, I'm not criticising that list in the slightest, but it's obvious that that's more than 400,000 people, and the Prime Minister will understand how anxious people in those particular groups are after having sacrificed so much. So can the Prime Minister tell us the answer to the question that they're going to be asking this morning, which is, when does he expect that all people in those 2 top groups can expect to be vaccinated?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think at this stage it is very, very important that people do not get their hopes up too soon about the speed with which we will be able to roll out this vaccine. It is beginning, as my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, has said, from next week. We are expecting several million doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine before the end of the year. We will then be rolling it out as fast as we possibly can. But that's why I put so much emphasis, Mr. Speaker, on the continuing importance of the tiering system of mass community testing at the same time as we go forward through these tough winter months, because we will need, at the same time as we roll out the vaccine, and he's right to ask about timetables, but as we roll out the vaccine over the next few weeks, Mr. Speaker, we will need to keep that tough tiering and testing regimes in place.
Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I press the Prime Minister a bit further about the plan for care homes? And I do so because we all want this to work, because that top category is residents in care homes. And that'll obviously be a huge concern for many people. This morning, the Welsh Government has already raised some serious practical problems about the delivery of vaccines into care homes. That's bearing in mind the temperatures at which the vaccines have to be stored. Now, the Prime Minister must know this is going to be a four-nation problem, must be aware that this problem would arise. And obviously we all want to overcome this problem, and it's in that spirit that I asked the Prime Minister what plans has he put in place to address these particular problems of getting the vaccine safely and quickly into care homes, given the practical difficulties of doing so and the anxiety that those in care homes will have about getting it quickly.
Prime Minister.
Well, he is entirely right to raise the issue of care homes and the our ability to distribute this particular type of vaccine rapidly into care homes, because it does need to be kept at minus 70 degrees, as I think the House understands. So there are logistical challenges to be overcome to get vulnerable people the access to the vaccine that they need. We are working on it with all the devolved administrations in order to ensure that the NHS across the country is able, and it's the NHS that will be in the lead, is able to distribute it as fast and as sensibly as possible to the most vulnerable groups. But he's right to raise that particular logistical difficulty. That's why it's also important that we get the AstraZeneca vaccine, which we hope will also come on stream. And while he's paying tribute to those who have been involved in the vaccines, perhaps he could also pay tribute to the work of the Vaccine Task Force, which secured the deal with Pfizer and which he, I think, criticised only a few weeks ago.
Keir Starmer.
Well, I pay tribute to everybody who's got us this far, and we'll work with all of them to get us where we need to go next. This has to be something which we all pull together to deliver this as quickly and safely as possible over the next few months, and I've made that offer to the Prime Minister before, and I do it again. And it's really in that vein that I turn to the next question, which is public confidence in the vaccine, which is a real cause for concern, because that's going to be crucial to the success of getting this rolled out across the country, getting our economy back up and running. As the Prime Minister knows, we've got the highest regulatory and medical safety standards in the world, but it's really important we do everything possible to counter dangerous, frankly life-threatening disinformation about vaccines. We on this side have called for legislation to be introduced to clamp down on this, with financial penalties for companies that fail to act. So will the Prime Minister work with us on this and bring forward emergency legislation in the coming days, which I think the whole House would support?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are, of course, working to tackle all kinds of disinformation across the internet, and he's right to single out the anti-vaxxers and those who I think are totally wrong in their approach, and he's right to encourage take-up of vaccines across the country. And we'll be publishing a paper very shortly, Mr. Speaker, on online harms designed to tackle the very disinformation that he speaks of.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, can I also urge the Prime Minister, once the government has a communications plan for the vaccine, can he share it with the House so that we can all say the same thing in the same way to the country, and thus encourage as many people to take up the vaccine as possible? Now, the arrival of vaccine is obviously wonderful news, but it will come too late to many who've lost their jobs already. And I want to turn to the collapse of the Arcadia Group and Debenhams in the last 48 hours. That's put 25,000 jobs at risk, and obviously caused huge anxiety to many families at the worst possible time, and threatens to rip the heart out of many high streets in our towns and cities. So can the Prime Minister tell the House what is he going to do now to protect the the jobs and the pensions of all those affected by these closures?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're looking at what we can do to protect all the jobs that are being lost currently across the country, and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Business Enterprise and Skills, has written to the Insolvency Service to look at the conduct of the Arcadia directors, and we will be doing everything we can to restore the high streets of this country with our £1 billion High Streets Fund and the Levelling Up Fund, Mr. Speaker. But I must say, I think it is a bit much that the right honourable gentleman should attack the economic consequences of the fight against coronavirus, when last night neither he nor his troops could be bothered to vote for measures, sensible, balanced measures that would open up the economy and allow businesses to trade, Mr. Speaker. How can he attack the economic consequences of our battle against coronavirus when he won't even support measures to open up the economy?
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, when I abstain, I come to the House and explain. When the Prime Minister abstains, he runs away to Afghanistan and gives the taxpayer a £20,000 bill. Mr. Speaker, on the question of jobs, there are serious questions that need to be answered about the collapse of these businesses. And I don't want the Prime Minister to deflect from that and what it means for these many families, because this isn't an isolated incident. Over 200,000 retail jobs have been lost this year. That's 200,000 individuals and their families. 20,000 stores have been closed on our high street. And that's before the latest restrictions. Now, I suspect if we'd seen that scale of job losses in any other sector, there would have been much greater action already. So I urge the Prime Minister to take this seriously, don't deflect. As well as providing emergency support, will the Prime Minister work with us, with the trade unions and the sector, to finally bring forward a comprehensive plan to save retail jobs and to provide the sector with the much greater support it needs through this crisis? These are real people, Prime Minister, with real jobs, this family, who are facing the sack. They really need to hear from you.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're of course supporting every job that we possibly can, as we're supporting every life and every livelihood, Mr. Speaker, with a £200 billion programme. But I'd take him more seriously, frankly, if he actually could be bothered to vote for a programme, a moderate programme, to keep the virus down and open up the economy, Mr. Speaker. And we're getting on with our programme, as I say, of rolling out the vaccine, of sensible tiering measures, in addition to which, Mr. Speaker, we are delivering 40 more hospitals and 20,000 more police officers. And he talks about abstention, Mr. Speaker. When it came to protecting our veterans from unfair prosecution, he chose to abstain. When it came to protecting the people of this country from coronavirus at this critical moment, he told his troops to abstain, Mr. Speaker. Captain Hindsight is rising rapidly up the ranks and has become General Indecision, Mr. Speaker. That's what's happening, I'm afraid, to the right honourable gentleman. He dithers. We get on with the job.
Imran Hamad Khan.
Mr. Speaker, next week marks 1 year since the Prime Minister won a mighty majority. His bold vision turned the red wall blue, ensuring our communities would no longer be neglected. As part of the PM's plan to level up, a new infrastructure bank has been promised. Mr. Speaker, you know Wakefield as the crossroads of the kingdom. Our cathedral spire, the tallest in God's own country, and historically the principal city of West Yorkshire, and the pulsating, oxygenating heart of the Red Wall, all make it the perfect city for the new bank's home. Will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, commit to establish the new infrastructure bank in Wakefield and restore my city's glory?
Well, my honourable friend is a magnificent doughty campaigner for Wakefield, and I know that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will listen very closely to his call for the National Infrastructure Bank to be established in Wakefield, and he should wait on events, Mr. Speaker.
Let's head up to Scotland with the leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, for the first time in months, people have woken up with a genuine sense of hope. The news on the vaccine approval is the news that we've all been waiting for. But, Mr. Speaker, for many, that hope on the horizon remains far too distant. there are millions who still haven't had a single penny of support from this UK government. As others rightly received help, they received none. Prime Minister, yesterday I met with Excluded UK, who represent many of these 3 million citizens. For the last 9 months, the excluded have been living without any help, without any hope, and it is now tragically costing lives. Prime Minister, they told me something genuinely shocking. They are aware of 8 people who have taken their lives in the last 10 days. 8 people in 10 days. Prime Minister, we're now a little over 3 weeks from Christmas. These people need help. Will the Prime Minister commit to looking again at the support package for the excluded to ensure no one, but no one, is left behind?
Prime Minister.
Well, I obviously sympathise very much, Mr. Speaker, with those who've taken their lives and their families. And this has been a very tough time for the country. We're investing massively in mental health support across the country, as he knows, which flows through in Barnet consequentials to obviously to Scotland. And we put in a huge package of support. He knows this, but I must repeat this for self-employed people across the country. And I know there are hard-to-reach people, but they are also supported with the increases in universal credit and the many other means of support that are currently on offer, Mr. Speaker. And I think when you look at the overall level of support this government has given to people across this country, it compares favourably with any other government around the world.
Returning to Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
I have to say, and I do this with regret, Mr. Speaker, that simply isn't good enough. These people need help, and I'm asking the Prime Minister to think very carefully about this. This has been an abject failure by this UK government, and the Prime Minister has been missing in action. The government has U-turned on almost everything else, so why can't the Prime Minister and the Chancellor change their minds on their support for these 3 million people? These are people working in construction, creative industries, events, education, hospitality, retail and healthcare. They haven't just been left behind. They've been ignored for 9 months. The Chancellor has repeatedly dogged this issue. Excluded UK haven't been offered one formal meeting with the government minister. Will the Prime Minister commit today to a meeting and working with Excluded UK on a meaningful package of support? Or is the Prime Minister simply going to abandon these people 3 weeks from Christmas?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've abandoned nobody, and we're continuing to support people. We have announced nearly in addition to the support I've already mentioned, we've announced nearly 400 million to support vulnerable children and their families through the winter. We've increased universal credit, as I just mentioned, to the housing, increased local housing allowance, provided billions more to local authorities to help those who are hard to reach. But I may say to the right honourable gentleman that the best way to help the self-employed, to help the economy of this whole country, is to get us moving again with the package of measures that the House voted for last night to allow retail to start up again, to allow business to start up again. The gentleman for the Scottish actually said it's shameful. We on this side of the House do not think retail is shameful, Mr. Speaker. We want businesses to open up again, Mr. Speaker, and that is the nature of the package that was voted for last night, which was, I think, was quite right. And it's a great shame that the right honourable gentleman opposite could not bring himself to support it.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time of enormous pressure on our healthcare, can I welcome the government and the NHS continued commitment to the new combined medical facility in Edenbridge? Now, can he confirm to me that the sale of the existing Memorial Hospital, which was built by public donation about a century ago, will now help fund the new building? Now, he's investing £20 million in the Medicines Manufacturing Fund to benefit Wales, Scotland, England and Northern Ireland. So will he join me in welcoming the skill of all those in the NHS and indeed the Health Secretary in making historic donations work for our communities today?
Prime Minister.
Well, yes, I can, Mr. Speaker, but and I congratulate him on his campaign. Any decision to allow for the sale of the hospital is, of course, a matter for the local CCG, but I know that he is fully supporting the £12 million that we put in for the development of a new health and wellbeing centre for Edenbridge.
Let's head to Wales with Liz Saville-Roberts. Liz Saville-Roberts.
Diolch yn fawr, Lefarydd. And first of all, I'd like to add my voice to welcome the licensing of the vaccine. This really is a ray of light in dark times. But last week, his government published their statement of funding showing a reduction in the amount Wales receives through transport spend in England from 80.9% to 36.6%. This reveals in black and white the iniquity of the rail betrayal being inflicted on Wales. Welsh taxpayers are paying for English transport and HS2, but we don't get a fair return. Could he inform the House how much investment he is funneling away from Wales due to his government's decision to label this white elephant an England and Wales scheme, despite not a single inch of the railway being in Wales?
Prime Minister.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I simply fail to recognise the characterisation that the Right Honourable Lady makes of investment across the whole of the UK. The Welsh Government will receive an additional £1.3 billion next year. We're providing 240 million more to support Welsh farmers, 2.1 million to support fisheries in Wales. And the last time I looked at transport in Wales, the Welsh Labour government spent £144 million on plans for a bypass, an M4 bypass, which they then junked, Mr. Speaker.
Robin Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Aberconwy would like to thank the Prime Minister for his early Christmas present in this vaccine. Like many presents, we might not have made it, but this government, this union, could afford to buy it for this country. Mr. Speaker, I was in Llanrwst this Saturday talking with small businesses who've had to deal with flooding in February and the pandemic since March. All they want to do is trade. So will my right honourable friend join me in thanking Shop Vlodau, Shop Sioned and Emma James Cakes for battling through a really difficult 2020? And does he agree that this news of a vaccine and its licensing gives real hope to these three women, these three entrepreneurs and thousands like them across the UK, hope for a better 2021? Thank you.
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate the three female entrepreneurs that he mentions, and they will be helped. They will be helped by the vaccine, and they will be allowed to do business again. And what a shame it is, Mr. Speaker, that our programme, sensibly, safely to open up the economy, wasn't supported by the right honourable gentleman.
Let's head up to Preston with Sir Mark Hendrick. Sir Mark.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has put at risk the Good Friday Agreement and peace in Northern Ireland after promising the people of this country he wouldn't. He promised the country a world-beating test, track and trace system and conveniently forgotten to provide the track and trace part of the promise. He promised an oven-ready deal with the EU to win the 2019 general election, and we look like having no deal. When will the Prime Minister follow through and deliver on his promises instead of behaving like a second-hand car salesman?
Prime Minister.
Well, if the honourable gentleman is saying that he wants to keep this country in the EU, which I think was the gist of what he was saying, Mr. Speaker, then he's going to be sorely disappointed, and so will the party opposite.
Because.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. They said that Britain was a nation of shopkeepers, and in Stockton, we're proud to have some of the best retailers in the country. They've had a tough year. They're grateful for the support they've received from the government, but remain concerned about the future of business rates. Can my right honourable friend confirm that the government remains committed to a fundamental review of business rates, and will he join me in encouraging people to get down the local high street and shop local this Christmas?
Yes. Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. And my old friend reminds me it is Small Business Saturday this Saturday, and everybody should be shopping local. But I can also tell him that the Treasury is considering responses to the call for evidence on business rates ahead of the review's conclusion in the spring.
Alex Davies-Jones.
Mr. Speaker, we all know it will take a long time for many industries to recover from the impact of coronavirus. The aviation sector and its supply chain, which supports almost 250,000 jobs, has been uniquely impacted. Many workers and their families at GE Aviation in Pontypridd have been financially ruined, and I know that this is sadly a familiar scenario for families up and down the country. The Prime Minister urgently needs to wake up to the situation. So will he therefore commit to a sector-specific support deal to save our aviation industry before it's too late?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're doing a huge amount to support our aviation industry, but I appreciate the stress and difficulties that many families are in at the moment because of the threats to that sector, which are global, alas, because people just aren't flying in the way that they were before the pandemic. But I have every hope that it will bounce back very strongly, particularly in this country, which is a world leader in aviation, once we get the economy moving again, as I hope we can.
Dr. Liam Falk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In North Somerset, as in the rest of the United Kingdom, small businesses are the lifeblood of the economy, providing over 60% of all our jobs. Post-COVID, we will require a private sector, small business-led recovery. Can I ask the Prime Minister if he will consider a new discipline within the government in the form of a small business test, so that every tax, every regulation and every bit of legislation is measured against whether or not it will provide support for this sector, which will be vital for our post-COVID recovery?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank him for his excellent suggestion, and he's a great champion of small business. Every measure the government produces is judged by the effect, the impact it will have on businesses large and small, Mr. Speaker, but we're also providing, as he knows, for these particularly difficult circumstances, about £100 billion of business support, the bounce back loans and many other forms of support. But the best thing for businesses large and small, shop local, as I said earlier on, and allow the economy cautiously and prudently to reopen.
Emily Wilbert.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to congratulate the Prime Minister, as I think next week marks his first year in post. However, in that time, over 71,000 COVID deaths, the highest rate in Europe. Over 2 trillion in debt, the worst performing economy in the G7. Failing Brexit negotiations, and at least 1.5 billion of taxpayers' money spent on contracts to Tory friends and donors, whilst at the same time whipping his MPs to vote against meals for hungry children. Which one of these achievements is he most proud of?
Prime Minister.
Well, I think I take her point more seriously if she and her party could be bothered to vote for measures that will simultaneously. I'm sorry. She defied the Labour whip. Forgive me, Mr. Speaker. She defied the injunction to dither from the dither in chief. But it'd be a good thing. It would be a good thing. She didn't obey you. Didn't obey his instructions to dither. But it would be. I take her more seriously, Mr. Speaker, if her party leader would vote for measures that would open up the economy whilst protecting lives across the UK.
Let's head to Lincoln with Carl McCartney. Carl McCartney.
Good afternoon, Speaker. I would like to thank my honourable friend and his Cabinet colleagues for last week granting my request to fund the North Highcombe Relief Road, the final part of the Eastern Bypass around my constituency of Lincoln. I look forward to seeing internal combustion engine vehicles gliding over its smooth tarmac surface for many, many decades to come. As the Prime Minister will know, my constituents have been clear to me on recent decisions on lockdown and the new tier system, as they normally and refreshingly are. Lincolnshire is a very big space, and so despite my county colleagues succumbing to the wily charms of the Secretary of State for Health last night, will my right honourable friend seriously consider allowing local decision makers the chance to set tier systems locally? After all, local decision makers know their patches far better than any Whitehall official. Local businesses in Lincoln, including some excluded UK members who have yet to receive any support, are desperate to get back to work and to fire up our UK economy.
Prime Minister.
Well, I repeat what I said to the House several times yesterday afternoon. I'm grateful to my honourable friend. Of course, we want to reflect local conditions as closely and accurately as we can in taking our decisions about tiering, but we must look at the entire national picture. And I'm just on his point about internal combustion engines, I just remind him that a hydrogen engine can also be an internal combustion engine.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent was diagnosed with ME in 2019, and earlier this year her employer agreed that she was no longer able to work and to do the job she loved. She applied for PIP, but the DWP has ruled that she is fit to work. They've not engaged with their previous employer, who have a wealth of evidence to the contrary, and used it to reach its own decision. Her life has been devastated by this diagnosis. She told me the PIP process is predicted on being able to stand up for yourself, and as a disabled person I cannot do this. So will the Prime Minister meet with me to ensure that our benefit system works for sufferers of chronic fatigue and does not limit decisions to single points of evidence?
Prime Minister.
I'm grateful for her question. She's raising an important issue. I know that many people suffer from the syndrome that she describes, and I'll ensure that she gets a proper representation, proper meeting with the relevant minister to discuss her objectives.
Let's head to North Cornwall with Scott Mann. Scott Mann.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some in the media only discuss levelling up through the prism of the north-south divide. However, Cornwall has pockets of deprivation, and many communities in my constituency of North Cornwall also need investment and support. So I welcome the government's announcement of the £4 billion levelling up fund and the decision to review the Green Book so that projects outside of London and the South East are more likely to benefit from government investment. However, in light of the new spending commitments, can my right honourable friend confirm that the Shared Prosperity Fund is separate to the Levelling Up Fund, that there will be an announcement on that soon, and it will be simpler and less time-consuming for small businesses to access than the onerous EU schemes they are replacing?
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable friend because he's completely right about the importance of the new UK Shared Prosperity Fund. It will be different from the Levelling Up Fund, and we're going to work closely with him and with people in Cornwall to make sure that we use the additional funding best for the needs of people and communities in Cornwall.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, the Scottish Government announced a £500 bonus scheme for our health and social care heroes who've helped us care for us through the pandemic. That's a policy that the Scottish Conservatives have been trying to claim some reflected credit for over the last few hours. Now, the Prime Minister is not responsible for health in Scotland, but he is responsible for it in England. So will he put his government's money where his Scottish colleagues' mouths clearly are and match that bonus initiative for health and social care workers in England? And will he instruct the Chancellor that wherever a bonus scheme like that is introduced, that the Treasury will not try to snaffle back the tax from it and let it be paid tax-free?
Prime Minister.
Well, on the last point, of course, that's a matter for the Scottish Government, which has the fiscal freedom to do that. But I thank health and social care workers. I thank health and social care workers in Scotland and across the whole country. And I'm proud of the increases that we've been able to put in, 12.8% over the last 3 years, and a pay rise for 1 million people in the NHS as part of the biggest ever investment in the NHS, even before COVID began, an investment that will continue under this government.
Let's head to Ludlow with Philip Dunn. Philip Dunn.
In 10 days' time, the government is hosting the UN Climate Summit ahead of COP26 next year. I urge the Prime Minister not to curb your enthusiasm for the environment. And will he show international leadership by setting out an ambitious but achievable target for emissions in 2030 as the UK's nationally determined contribution on the path to net zero Britain?
Prime Minister.
Well, I'm proud, Mr. Speaker, that the UK led the way in instituting a target of net zero by 2050. Of all the developed nations, we were the first, and we're looking at our nationally determined contribution, which will be extremely ambitious and will be published around the time of the Climate Summit on the 12th of December this year.
Final question, heading to Scotland with Drew Hendry. Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister mentioned universal credit earlier. His and the Chancellor's decision to increase universal credit by £20 a week during the pandemic was an admission of what my constituents have known for years, that universal credit simply isn't enough to live on. In January, his government will cap the benefits of thousands of universal credit claimants. The average losses will be £250 per month, mainly to families with children. He already knows it's not enough to live on. So will he now commit to scrap the cap and to guarantee to continue the £20 per week uplift? Or is he going to throw these families to the wolves too, just like the 3 million excluded?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I just repeat the point I made earlier on about the huge sums the government has invested in looking after families, lives and livelihoods across the whole of the UK, well north of £200 billion now, an uplift of universal credit, as he rightly says, of £1,000, and we will continue to support families across this country throughout the pandemic. But the objective must be, as I hope he would agree, to get the economy moving again and get people back into work in the way that I think everybody would want. And it is a fact, Mr. Speaker, that under this government, in spite of all the difficulties we have faced, the unemployment rate is lower in the UK than it is in France, in Spain, in Italy, in Canada and the United States. And we will continue to work to look after every job that we can.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order.
Order. Order. I call Ed Miliband to ask his urgent question.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy to make a statement on support for business and the retention of jobs on the High Street in light of the announcement of Arcadia entering administration and Debenhams going into liquidation.
Minister Paul Scully.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And as the Retail Minister, I hope he realises that the Secretary of State is not here, that we do take this incredibly importantly, and that's why, because it is, that's why I want to focus on the detail, because it is a worrying time for the retail sector, particularly by those that are affected by the announcements made this week. On Monday, Arcadia Group Limited, which employs approximately 13,000 people, appointed administrators. And they are assessing all options available to the group. They'll honour orders made over the Black Friday weekend. No redundancies have yet been announced, and existing sales channels will continue to operate while administrators evaluate options. The Secretary of State has written to the insolvency services and asked that they expedite consideration of the administrator's report. Yesterday, Debenhams, which employs approximately 12,000 people, announced the decision of administrators to wind down the company. No redundancies have been announced, and existing sales channels will continue to operate while administrators evaluate options. We know this is going to be a worrying time for employees and their families, and we stand ready to support them. I want to pay particularly tribute to the hard-working staff who have kept these well-recognised businesses going in difficult times for so long. While government has no role in the strategic direction or management of private retail companies, we're in regular contact with both companies and the administrators to fully understand the situation they are facing. The coronavirus crisis has made life difficult for many high street retailers like Arcadia and Debenhams, particularly those who are already facing challenging trading conditions before the pandemic. We acted quickly at the start of the pandemic to deliver one of the most generous and comprehensive economic packages in the world, including the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, which up to the 30th of September had provided £7.7 billion worth of support to companies in the retail and wholesale sector, removing all eligible properties in the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors from business rates for 12 months worth over £10 billion, cash grants for up to £25,000 for retail, hospitality and leisure businesses with a rateable value of between £15,000 and £51,000, and more than £50 billion in business loans, which supported 9.6 million jobs and provided flexibility. With also legislation to protect commercial tenants from eviction, and through the Plan for Jobs, we've announced a series of measures to protect, support and create jobs, including our £2 billion Kickstart scheme and doubling the number of frontline work coaches, which will be important in this situation in particular. The government is committed to support the retail sector, and we're working closely with industry through these unprecedented times, particularly to ensure safe reopening of non-essential retail today. On Monday, my right honourable friend, the Community Secretary, encouraged local authorities to allow shops to open for extended hours to accommodate more shoppers safely in the lead up to Christmas. I'll continue to work with the sector to meet future challenges. Indeed, I'll be co-chairing the next meeting of the Retail Sector Council tomorrow to discuss our strategic approach to the sector, and I have regular retail calls, including one last week with representatives from Arcadia amongst the retailers on that call. We are confident that the sector has the skills, the knowledge and drive to bounce back.
Secretary of State Ed Miliband.
Let me join the Minister in expressing deep sympathy for those who are at risk of losing their jobs. The test of government, and indeed this House, is whether that sympathy translates into action. So I have 4 specific questions for him. First, Philip Green owes the workers at Arcadia a moral duty. His family took a dividend worth £1.2 billion from the company, the largest in UK history, more than 3 times the size of the pension deficit. The workers at Arcadia should not pay the price of Philip Green's greed. So will the Minister now publicly call for him to make good any shortfall in the pension scheme? And will he ensure that the pensions regulator takes all possible steps to make sure this happens? Second, we need to learn lessons, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the insolvency bill in the summer, Labour put forward amendments to make pension fund holders priority creditors when businesses went bust. The Minister said it was not necessary. Does he agree now that that was a mistake, that this change would have better protected the pensions at Arcadia, and that this should be put right through legislation in the future? Third, on the workers at Debenhams and indeed Arcadia facing redundancy, given the scale of redundancies and the grim economic backdrop, will he look at providing specific and targeted help for them to get back into work? Fourth, we have an emergency on our high streets with an estimated 20,000 shops closing and 200,000 workers losing their jobs since the economic crisis began. While we welcome the support that has been provided, will he recognise that the government must do more? Extending the rent evictions moratorium beyond December, when it is due to expire, increasing support for hospitality businesses, which was a call across this House yesterday, and addressing the massive disadvantage that high street businesses face around business rates compared to online retailers. Madam Deputy Speaker, today is a day of great news on the vaccine, but the government has a massive responsibility to preserve the businesses and jobs we need on the other side of this crisis. They are still not acting on a scale that meets the economic emergency our country faces. They need to do so.
Minister.
I'm grateful for the right honourable gentleman for raising some really important points here in terms of the pension schemes and support for those facing redundancy. The majority of defined pension schemes are run effectively. We're fortunate to have a robust and flexible system of pension protection in the UK. The independent pension regulator has a range of powers to protect pension schemes, and it does work closely with those involved. For schemes where the employer goes insolvent, the Pension Protection Fund is there to help protect the members. Anybody already in receipt of the pensions will continue to be paid, and other members will receive at least Pension Protection Fund compensation levels. The Pension Protection Fund is confident that its funding plan and investment approach position it well to weather the current market volatility and future challenges. It wouldn't be appropriate at this stage for ministers to comment on individual cases, which are a matter for the regulator. But in respect to the staff facing possible redundancy, the DWP Rapid Response Service has been in ongoing conversations already with Debenhams and has now been in contact with Arcadia. Both have been offered support by the Rapid Response Service, which includes connecting people to jobs in the labour market, helping with job search, including CV writing, interview skills, where to find jobs and how to apply for them, helping to identify transferable skills and skills gaps linked to the local labour market and what benefits they may get and how to claim. I've talked about the fact that we've doubled the number of workplace support staff in Job Centre Pluses, and clearly with knowing where the big stores are for Debenhams in particular, then we will be able to offer that sort of targeted support. The right honourable member talked about his proposed changes for the corporate governance and solvency practice bill, and this was a matter of balance, because elevating pension debts, which can often be quite large, will therefore, by its very nature, dilute the amount that is available to trade and credit suppliers, but also other suppliers, including people with unpaid wages. So it's trying to get that complexity and balance that is right. He finally talks about hospitality and support for other sectors. Now, clearly the high street is an ecosystem. It's not just all about shops and retail. We need to make sure that we are doing as much as we can to continue to wrap our economy, our arms around the economy at this particularly challenging time, especially as he acknowledges that there is light at the end of the tunnel, but we must not take our foot off the gas. We must remain alert in terms of our own behaviours as community members going up and down the high street, shopping local where we can to support retailers as they remain open, but also as a government to make sure that we can support retailers and hospitality sectors, both in the support that I mentioned, but also in encouraging them to be able to trade and remain open in all three tiers as best we can.
Suzanne Webb.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I am sure the thoughts of the whole House will be with those employees of both Debenhams and Arcadia who face huge uncertainty this week, particularly in the run-up to Christmas. These are long-standing bastions of the High Street, but both organisations have been struggling for quite some time. Indeed, Debenhams has been in administration since January. While no redundancies have yet been announced, many of my constituents will be affected, and so can my honourable friend assure me that if the worst were to happen, that the government is ready to support anyone affected, whether through job centres or universal credit.
Honourable friend, and she's absolutely right. I know that members of our constituency in Stourbridge are going to be absolutely concerned about this, and we will be prepared to, as I say, step up concentration within the Job Centre Plus, but also make sure that we have support both in finding jobs, but also retaining as many jobs in our high streets as possible.
We now go to the SNP spokesperson, Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There's a great deal of public affection, I'm sure the Minister will agree, for the brands under Arcadia and for Debenhams in particular. And whilst we must hope that redundancies can be avoided wherever possible, this is indeed a sad day for our embattled high streets. All of our thoughts are with the thousands of workers, including those in my own constituency, who will often have given years or even decades of service in retail and will be devastated by this news. They must be given all the help they can get to have all of their pension rights retained. So firstly, will the Minister confirm that his government will ensure that Sir Philip Green's obligation to pensions are met? And will his department work with trade unions to ensure that these workers are treated fairly and are adequately supported through the process? Like others, many of these workers will face the difficulties of how to put food on the table and how to find a new job or retrain in a crowded market. They will need the safety net of universal credit to make ends meet. So I urge the Minister to use his best efforts to again work with colleagues to retain the £20 per week uplift and to scrap the planned benefit cap that will cost an average of £250 a month. Universal credit is already not enough. Taking away the uplift is taking food from their tables. Finally, we also need to remember that there are many small businesses in local supply chains that will be affected by this news. Some of these small business owners won't survive without support, while others will be joining the 3 million people who've been excluded from support. The government cannot continue to ignore them, and I urge the Minister again to finally get support for this group who are becoming increasingly desperate.
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman, and yes, indeed, existing pension commitments made to the pension regulator are still commitments that need to be kept, and that's important to say there. But what support he talks about support for employees. If people need financial support quickly, they may be able to claim universal credit and/or employment and support allowance. But our plan for jobs includes a series of measures to protect, support and create jobs, because it's important to, as best we can, to get these people back into work as soon as possible. And we have our £238 million JETS programme to help support that. He talked about suppliers and the possibility of them losing out. The administrators will clearly take over the company's operations and will seek to establish the position regarding some suppliers. The trade credit reinsurance scheme is designed very much to support business cope with the economic impacts of COVID-19 and ensure there's adequate confidence and credit within supply chains.
Now go to Nikki Aiken.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As my right honourable friend is aware, the Arcadia Group is headquartered within my constituency, and its brands, including Debenhams and Topshop, have their flagship stores on Oxford Street. COVID has the potential to be the straw that breaks the camel's back for bricks and mortar retail. The new West End company and I welcome his and his department's continuing support for the retail sector. I note the government's announcement this week to extend shopping trading hours Monday to Saturday until January, but particularly in the short term, an extension to Sunday trading hours would be of huge benefit to retailers. Will he support me, the Sun on Sunday newspaper, and the retailers like Marks and Spencer campaigning to extend Sunday trading?
I thank my honourable friend, and I look forward to joining New West End Company, and I assume her on Saturday, not only to celebrate Small Business Saturday, but also the traffic-free shopping in the West End, which West End accounts for 3% of the entire UK economy and many jobs. In terms of Sunday trading, this is not something that we are proposing to do at this stage, but we are extending shopping hours throughout the weekdays. And we want to work with local authorities to make sure that they can support the safe return to shoppers for our high streets up and down the country, including the West End.
Chair Select Committee Darren Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The collapse of Arcadia and Debenhams are two big examples of the broader challenge for survival in the high street-based retail sector. Every job lost and every store closed is devastating for families and communities across the entire country. The Business Committee has today written to the Secretary of State, and I know we'll have full answers in due course, but can I ask the Minister one specific question today about support for small businesses in the retail supply chain? I'd like to push them a bit further to see whether there'll be specific support, maybe a task force for retail small businesses to help with the hundreds of millions of pounds of orders which could go unpaid.
I thank the honourable gentleman, and I can't specify in terms of a task force or what group, but we will be acutely looking at what we can do for supply chains and also the future of the high street. When you get flagships like the 200-odd-year-old Debenhams leaving our high streets, it's so important that we make sure that we get a coordinated response to this, and I'll happily work with him on that.
Now going to Caroline Noakes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend and all of the House is concerned about the numbers of jobs lost in Arcadia Group potentially, but we also have to be concerned about those employed by micro businesses, perhaps without premises. who have so far not benefited from schemes put in by the government to support them. I would ask my honourable friend to think again about those who so far have not had government support and may well be adversely impacted by the news that we have heard about Arcadia if they are working in the retail supply chain.
I thank my honourable friend. She raises a really important point about when we've actually wrapped our arms around the economy. Clearly, it's very difficult to do things at pace and at speed to cover everybody, but we'll always make sure that we reflect to help as many people and try and fill those cracks as best we can.
Sarah Olney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd also like to express my sympathies to all those employees of Debenhams and Arcadia Group who find themselves out of work so close to Christmas and in such an uncertain time. I'd like to ask the Minister whether his department will work with local authorities to support them to be able to offer more flexible rates terms to perhaps new businesses who want to come in, who want to set up in a lot of town centres will be experiencing large voids in their retail spaces, and that affects town centres, it affects communities. What can the business department do to work with local authorities to perhaps lower the barriers to new entrants into the retail sector?
I thank the honourable lady, and there's plenty that we can work together with the sector and indeed the whole high street gamut of businesses, including talking about rent, with getting the balance right with landlords and tenants, but also rates, as you say. The Economic Secretary to the Treasury is joining me tomorrow on the Retail Sector Council call that I mentioned to talk about the fundamental business rates review, and I hope then we'll be able to work with local authorities indeed to have that flexibility.
Marco Longhi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does my honourable friend agree that in my constituency, Dudley Council and other local leaders will play an instrumental role in rebuilding and revitalising the High Street? And therefore, can he confirm also that the High Streets Task Force will stand ready to provide whatever advice may be needed to them in this endeavour?
Thank the honourable friend, and I know he works tirelessly for his constituency and his local economy, and it's so important that we do get together to look at the High Street, because many of these conversations were what does the High Street look like in 10, 15 years' time. Now it's what does it look like next year, maybe only the year after. We have to get a speedy response, but a holistic response.
We now go to Clive Betts.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The business rate relief for retailers this year has been welcome, but obviously not sufficient for Debenhams and Arcadia and all their employees who are tragically going to lose their jobs just before Christmas. Could I say to the Minister, however, that there is a fundamental unfairness that Amazon pay only 0.7% of their turnover in business rate, and high street retailers pay 2% or more. Last year, the Housing, Communities and Local Government Select Committee suggested to the government that they look at bringing in a digital sales tax and use the money then to provide long-term business rate relief for retailers in the high street. Given the government promised to look at business rate reform in 2015, will they now get on with it and give that certainty of reduced business rates to the high street as a matter of urgency?
This is an important question, and indeed one exactly why we are doing the fundamental business rates reform. The consultation for the first stage has ended, and we'll be responding in the new year, but we do need to have that comprehensive approach to tackle both online and offline.
Rick Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Risborough Basket is an innovative scheme founded by Prince's Risborough Town Council in my constituency, with a mission to keep the pound in the town, enabling local shoppers to buy from small independent retailers and have their purchases personally delivered. It's a real boost to those high street businesses, but as they've set up the scheme, they've come across a number of regulatory burdens. So will my honourable friend join me in congratulating everyone that set up the Risborough Basket and commit to working with them so we can get rid of those regulatory burdens and ensure schemes like this can help high streets up and down the land?
I thank my honourable friend, and the Risborough Basket is one of those brutally simple schemes that are from bottom up, from grassroots up, and it's fantastic to hear that innovation. And I'd love to see what we can do to spread it across the country, never mind actually just working with the council to get rid of some of the burdens, the bureaucracy and regulation to help them prosper.
Let's head to the member for Huddersfield, Bury Sherman. Bury Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, thank you so much for this opportunity to say to this young minister that will he take a message back to Number 10 and to the Chancellor of the Exchequer as someone who's worked in retail as a young man, who is a co-op member of Parliament, who knows about retail. We have a workforce facing redundancy, facing hardship at Christmas. What we want from this government is a strategy. What we want from this government is leadership, not crocodile tears. There are a fifth of young people who have lost their jobs. 20,000 young people with a Kickstarter programme has hardly touched young people's lives. Will he get on with it? Take that message back to Number 10.
The honourable gentleman talks about me being young, which he can do many times over. But look, retail is, as he says, largely staffed by young people, by people on comparatively low pay, and so there's so much we can do. But the strategy doesn't just come from government; it comes from working with the sector itself. Hence, the Retail Sector Council can take that long-term view, but we can also work with retailers on the short-term COVID response as well. This is something for all of us to tackle.
Laura Farris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not many of my constituents will shed a tear for Philip Green, but we should be profoundly concerned about the 25,000 jobs at risk of redundancy. The High Street has been under unprecedented pressure. I welcome the remarks my honourable friend has made about the business rates review, but would he commit in the Chamber this afternoon to an extension of another 6 to 12 months in which rates are either reduced or reprieved to give the High Street the best chance of recovery?
I know the Treasury will be listening to that, and they are very, very aware, both from retail and hospitality in particular, about the, as they would describe it, the cliff edge that comes when the business rates are due to return at the end of April. And we will certainly look at that, and an announcement will be forthcoming.
Christian Mathers.
Mr. Speaker, in 1791, Susanna Townsend, a draper and haberdasher, moved to more commodious premises on Eastgate Street in Chester. She became Susanna Brown, and Browns of Chester still trades at the retail heart of Chester today as part of Debenhams. But as with other retail premises, they've been undermined by dodgy sale and leaseback property deals led by private equity firms, and that hasn't helped the situation. Browns does trade well as a profit, one of some Debenhams stores that do trade well. Will the Minister speak to administrators and support them so that where there is the potential for shops to continue as a going concern, that is explored and supported?
I think it's so. I agree with the honourable gentleman that it's so important that we can continue viable business where that is absolutely possible. So I know the administrators will have that at its heart.
Mr. Speaker, the news about Debenhams and Arcadia will cause many concern as we're heading into Christmas. Could my honourable friend reiterate the support that government will make available to employees who face an uncertain future? And further to that, this year alone in Barrow we've lost M&S, Topshop, Debenhams will be another heavy blow. What support will the government have to offer hope to the High Street in future?
Well, in terms of employees, as well as universal credit, as well as access to other support through Job Centre Plus, we will connect people to jobs in the labour market, help with the employment skills like CV writing, interview skills, etc., and identifying transferable skills. But as I've said, it's so important that we do more than that for our high streets to create the opportunities for those people to be able to take up. And that will be with us, with the Future High Streets Fund, with the work that we're doing with the Retail Sector Council and others at every level of government.
The Minister will be aware that a third of all retail jobs are held by people under the age of 25, and also huge numbers of work in retail are women because it allows flexible working and part-time hours. But also you'll be aware that many in retail are actually highly skilled jobs, and it's a complete misconception to suggest that working in retail isn't skilled and in years gone by wasn't a job or profession for life. So what specific support will the Minister be putting in place to offer to young people and to women who will be more disproportionately affected, who've also been disproportionately affected by the COVID pandemic, to ensure we don't have a complete lost generation of young people when it comes to finding their first job?
It's about creating those jobs and opportunities, working in the high street to make sure that we can keep retail and indeed expand the offering on our high streets, but clearly making sure that we can have the skills transfer work at a job centre level and elsewhere to encourage our young people to have those opportunities.
Just before we go to Bob Blackman, just to try and help everybody, because I know how important it is to everybody to actually get on the order. If we can speed up the answers, speed up the questions, I don't want to miss people out, but we may have to if we don't. And I'm sure this will be a good example of speed. Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Debenhams in Harrow Town Centre is an anchor store to the town centre. When Debenhams went into administration, 20 stores across their network were due to close. Fortunately, Harrow was not one of them. However, this has a long-term effect on the entirety of Harrow Town Centre. So can my honourable friend...
Can you pick the best of that out?
I think he was talking about anchor stores and the effect on the high street. I know Bob, I know the honourable gentleman very well, so I can predict his question. But yes, look, if you take out an anchor store, you hollow out high street. So it's so important that we look at this holistically, work together, local government, national government, and with retailers themselves to build up our high streets and shape them new.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ellesmere Port, like many places, has seen an exodus from the high street over the past decade, which has been accelerated in the last year. And of course, it's no coincidence that at the same time, online retail is booming. But my constituents don't judge the vibrancy of the area by the number of delivery drivers up their street. They judge it by the number of boarded up shops in their town centre. So we need a consistent funded plan for the high street. But just as importantly, we need a level playing field so high street shops have a chance of competing. Can the Minister assure us we'll get that?
Indeed, high streets certainly will change, but we need to get the balance right between online and bricks and mortar as well, because both have a really important position to play in our retail offering.
Geoffrey Clifton-Brown. Mr. Speaker, in my constituency, in just 3 towns, 27 shops have either closed or are about to close in the pandemic. So would my honourable friend commit today to use the government's very generous package of measures to retail businesses at all levels of government, from central government to local government to the LEPs, to follow the Prime Minister's lead to encourage a massive return to the high streets now that we're allowed to do so under the guidance?
I don't know, my honourable friend, and it's really important that as we're extending hours for retailers to be able to open through up to Christmas, we want to rip up and peel back on our bureaucracy as well. But we must encourage local authorities to do more, including offering free parking and issues like that.
Frederick Campbell.
Mr. Speaker, the High Street is facing utter devastation in the next few months unless drastic action is taken. Will the Minister undertake, in conjunction with the Treasury, to discuss a proposal I put to the Chancellor 3 months ago, where the banks and building societies are currently sitting on almost £200 billion of current accounts and deposit accounts, paying 0% interest? A 1% voucher would release £2 billion to be spent on the high street only, no cost to the taxpayer, and would be a benefit equivalent to that which was seen in Jersey in the summer, and hopefully will be seen in Northern Ireland next month, where a voucher scheme similar to that is going to be discussed and released.
I thank the honourable gentleman. It's certainly something that I will ask Treasury to look at and share with me myself.
Colbert.
Mr. Speaker, as my constituency neighbour, my honourable friend will be aware that many Carshalton and Wallington residents work in Debenhams and Arcadia stores, particularly the flagship store at the St Nicholas Centre in Sutton. So will my honourable friend join me in meeting the affected workers should the worst happen at that flagship store in Sutton and reassure them that the government is doing all it can to support them?
Indeed, as well as being a minister, clearly our constituency MP in Debenhams is at the heart of my high street as well, and I will certainly continue to meet with constituents affected by this and other issues around the high street.
Everyone withdrawn, Julie Moss.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's support for business has been both unprecedented and unparalleled, particularly in the retail sector. And I think the Minister's right to call it an ecosystem because it does have far-reaching effects in the economy. But would he also agree with me that what we've seen in our local communities on our high streets is incredible creativity and resilience, such as residents and retailers in Hertford who have formed the Hertford Hub, the Bishop Stortford bid, and that it's actually, whilst we look at business rates and so on, it's working with them and supporting them is how we'll let the sector thrive and survive.
It's so much about its grassroots up, and it's great to hear about the Hertford Hub and the Bishop Stortford bid as well. There's some brilliant examples of bids and the initiatives they're doing. I'd like to hear more.
I said to Scotland with Marion Fellows. Marion Fellows.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Retail Trade Union Ulster
has said it's seeking urgent meetings with Arcadia's administrators in a bid to preserve jobs. It's crucial that the voice of staff is heard over the future of business in all circumstances. What reassurance can the Minister give that this request will be met?
Well, clearly the administrators will do their work under their own purview, but I would encourage them to make sure, as I say, they can look at the whole of the issue to keep as many viable jobs going and as many viable parts of the business going as possible, so as not to hollow out our high streets.
We now go to Gerald Jones in Merthyr Tydfil. Gerald Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This is an awful situation for every high street and retail park right across the country, and even more so for the 25,000 people at Arcadia and Debenhams at risk of losing their jobs just before Christmas. So in outlining what action the government is taking to support the people affected, will the Minister specifically highlight any discussions that the government is having with the Welsh Government so that any support packages from both governments can be coordinated?
Clearly, with these big brand names, they are an issue for the UK as a whole. So we will continue to work with and listen to devolved administrations and speak to them about what support we can look at across the country, the UK as a whole.
Darren Henry.
Mr. Speaker, hospitality businesses are a vital part of our high streets. Winter is the time these businesses, like many others, make their plans for the next season. Currently, they are planning in the dark, having been singled out for restrictions and excluded from the Christmas bubble proposals. Therefore, many will have no option but to make some very difficult decisions this Christmas. Does my honourable friend agree that we need to consider a longer-term recovery for this vital component of the high street, and that the case to make the 5% VAT rate more permanent, extending it to the end of the financial year, might help address the issues of rent, debt and an uncertain cash flow going into 2021?
My honourable friend, and I know he's working hard for his hospitality sector offering in Broxtowe as well. I'll be leaving this place to speak to the hospitality sector representatives immediately after this, including whether they'll have a number of those asks. I look at that very, very sympathetically because, as I say, the high street is an ecosystem. We must all work together to make sure that we can support the business community as a whole.
Heading up to Manchester with Andrew Gwynn. Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a very worrying time for those employed by Debenhams and Arcadia stores in Denton, Stockport and Manchester, and indeed right across the country. Greater Manchester's Independent Prosperity Review identified structural changes in the retail sector due to the rise of e-commerce, and sadly we're seeing a rapid acceleration in these changes due to the pandemic. So what's the government doing to put in place a strategic plan for the sector, including retraining and reskilling into digital roles in the sector and in adjacent industries?
Minister.
We're working with the retail sector itself. That includes online businesses like Amazon and ASOS and bricks and mortar businesses like the retail brands that we all know and love, to make sure that we can get the whole gamut of retail together as one and look at the long-term prospects, including digitalisation and increasing the skills of retailers and those wanting to come into that sector.
Mr. Speaker, workers at Debenhams, Dorothy Perkins, Evans, Miss Selfridge, Burton's, Topman and Topshop in Dudley South face a really worrying time. But the challenges facing retail go much wider. So can my honourable friend confirm that the £1 billion Future High Streets Fund will be accelerated? And will he join me on a visit to Brierley Hill so that he can see for himself how much our bid will transform the town centre and help to support retail jobs in my constituency?
With the restrictions, it's nice to be offered a trip anywhere, so I'll be more than happy to take that up. But yes, indeed, the Future High Street Fund is a really important initiative along the way of tackling retail and our high streets as a whole. And I wish him well in his bid, which the answers will be announced shortly.
Heading up to Blackburn with Kate Learn. Kate Learn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is a Debenhams in my constituency, and my thoughts are with the staff at this time. But sadly, they aren't the only business going to the wall. Yesterday, I spoke to Barry, who runs a Beehive pub in Blackburn, and he described the Prime Minister's announcement of £1,000 for pubs as a slap in the face. Barry has spent thousands making sure his pub was COVID secure, and with no evidence of spread of the virus in the pub sector, he will now have to throw away thousands more in stock. He's now wondering whether he can survive, so I asked the Minister, did he pluck the figure out of the air, and does his department think that £1,000 will really be able to save our pubs and in turn our high streets?
Wet-led pubs have a particular issue where they're not offering food, and £1,000 doesn't go far enough in itself, but it does go alongside the other payments, the forbearance on rent, the moratorium that's still in place until the end of the year, business rates relief, VAT relief on certain parts of food that are not necessarily in that pub. But look, I will continue to work with the hospitality sector, and it's important to say, as she said, that hospitality should not be scapegoated because they have done so much work to make sure that they can offer a COVID-19 secure and warm welcome to their customers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Guildford's High Street is not only picturesque, but is home to one of the finest retail offerings in the South East, including Debenhams and Arcadia brands. Not only do we acknowledge the difficult uncertainty for employees today, but the significant square footage that these businesses occupy and the gaps that they will leave behind. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the government must actively work to help the High Street recover from coronavirus and also adapt to the long-term changes that will make our town centres sustainable for the future?
Guildford I know very well, and it's a destination for places, for people, residents around Surrey and further afield. And yes, we must all work together because we must get the balance right so we don't hollow out our town centres, including Guildford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Debenhams liquidation is a tragedy not only for the thousands of Debenhams employees, but for all retailers in shopping centres like Warrington's Golden Square, where Debenhams is the anchor department store driving footfall for the whole centre. With Arcadia brand stores in Golden Square also at risk and confidence in the wider retail sector waning, what specific support will shopping centres like Golden Square get to protect all their retailers, their employees and the vibrancy of our town centres?
In terms of shopping centres, it's really important that we get the balance right between landlords and tenants. So the moratorium it helps tenants, but clearly it doesn't help landlords. So we've got to get that balance right, and we will work with the retail sector to try and achieve that balance in the weeks and months to come.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Dorothy Perkins in Newcastle under Lyme has already closed earlier during this pandemic, and we've also lost major tenants such as Laura Ashley and Edinburgh Woolermill during this pandemic. So I welcome what we're doing with the Future High Streets. We do have a bid in with the Ministry of Communities, Housing and Local Government. Can you confirm that it will be accelerated? And we need to hear about that bid as soon as we can so we can get our Towns Fund bid in as well.
Jim, every success in that bid, which announcement will be forthcoming, but it's important. We've got Small Business Saturday coming up this Saturday, so independent stores, we must make sure they thrive, but the brands that he talks about that are going do drag footfall towards those smaller businesses, which is why we need to look at the High Street as a whole.
Williams.
Mr. Speaker, Debenhams is a cornerstone employer in Bangor City Centre. Its closure will be a severe blow to the staff who've worked there loyally for many years. Even more so now, I'm afraid, because the North Wales Business Council reports that across the region, 17% of businesses in retail and hospitality have already made redundancies. However, thinking creatively, what consideration has the Minister given to material government support specifically for repurposing large retail spaces into smaller short-term startup units?
We always work with local authorities to see what initiatives can come up and work closely with them, because it typically be local authorities and the LEPs and other business groupings around each local area that knows their local economy, and we're always happy to look at any initiatives.
Mr. Speaker, as a student, I worked for the then Burton Group, and I know how vital retail jobs are, especially for students and young people. Can my honourable friend confirm for my constituents in Darlington, who worked at Topshop, Burton's and Dorothy Perkins, the steps he is taking to provide support, advice and assistance to them?
I thank my honourable friend and commend his work in retail before, as many others around the House have done. But yes, we will work, as well as offering them support through universal credit and other benefits. We'll work with them through the Job Centre Plus and their frontline workers to help them with CV writing, to help them with creating opportunities and sharing opportunities with them, and ensuring transferable skills have a massive role to play in that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Up and down high streets in Nottingham, businesses big and small are really worried about their viability in the early parts of next year. They look at us talking about Debenhams and Arcadia today, and they think we'll be back in January, February and March talking about them unless something changes. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask the Minister the same question they are asking me. Beyond reviews and promises of reform in the future, what support is coming now to keep our high streets viable?
Keeping our high streets viable in terms of giving people business rates relief, giving people the businesses the moratorium to make sure that they cannot be evicted and cannot be chased for rent debts. But most importantly, keeping retail open in all three tiers so that they can actually trade their way out of this. What they want is not handouts, ideally, although they're doing the support, they want customers. They want customers for the long-term support.
On to Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our high streets need all the help that they can get, and the towns of Crewe and Nantwich face some of the highest parking charges in the region, while other towns in the area face none. Would the Minister agree that the local authority should at least ensure there's a level playing field, and perhaps reconsider its decision to reject some initiatives for December to introduce free parking to encourage people back onto the high street?
I think the honourable friend is absolutely right. Parking is something that when you're bringing your heavy bags back after a long evening shopping, hopefully, in the lead up to Christmas, then just a simple token like free parking or cheaper parking can really help drive that footfall and support our local high streets.
Let's head to Eltham with Clive Efford. Clive Efford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Debenhams workers have expressed concern about the performance of the administrators. There's been a lack of communication and delays in registering redundancies with the redundancy payment service, which in turn led to delayed payments to the workers themselves. So what can the Minister do to ensure that the rights of workers are protected in these situations?
Well, clearly, as I say, there are the measures in place that governs the administrators, but we will keep on top of this because the Secretary of State, my right honourable friend, has already written to the administrators to expedite his report. They will also follow up, though, to make sure that we can keep an eye on them to support workers not only through the administrators' redundancy phase, but back into good work.
Andrew?
Mr. Speaker, as my honourable friend will know, I was a furniture retailer for many years prior to arriving in this place. This year has been hugely challenging for our high streets, and my thoughts are first and foremost with those employees of Arcadia and the Debenhams. Does my honourable friend agree with me, though, that the government must continue to actively work to help the high streets both recover from coronavirus, but more importantly adapt to the more long-term challenges that our town centres are facing at the moment?
I know my honourable friend's experience as a retailer and his other work is going to be massive in the months to come to share this. But yes, absolutely, we must make sure that high streets we can shape their change, and we can allow businesses to pivot to allow for that change as well, so that our high streets can survive and thrive.
I'll do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure, like many others, I'm concerned about the many workers across Edinburgh and in my constituency of Edinburgh West who will today be worried about their jobs with Arcadia, but also the number of independent shops that I have in my constituency who are struggling. I need a level playing field with the online behemoths of this world like Amazon. I have a suggestion, a plan to offer a postage support for those independent businesses in the same way as the government helped the hospitality sector. Would the Minister be prepared to meet me to discuss that?
I'll happily meet her, and it's important when she talks about independent retail that we do realise that these big anchor stores do have a massive effect if they hollow out the high streets on those small businesses. So it's really important that we look at both alike.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too earned my spurs in retail at Woolworths and Home Bargains. This year has been incredibly challenging for high street retailers, and my thoughts are with the employees of Arcadia and Debenhams. Does my honourable friend agree that we must actively work to help the high streets not just recover from the pandemic, but to look at all of the other long-term issues that face them, from car parking charges to business rates? I co-chaired the Retail APPG, and we would very much like to see him at the next meeting to discuss those issues.
I thank my honourable friend, and his experience will be valuable. And yes, I will be happy to join him in his APPG. But it's so important that, yes, we look at not just at the immediacy, but with the new normal, there is a new reality behind that behaviour change that is baked into people's approach to the high street. And it's important that we get that long-term strategic view right as well.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm deeply concerned by the situation facing Debenhams as a key part of Glasgow city centre, as well as the stores operated by Arcadia, and my thoughts are with the staff. And I know that the Scottish Government stand ready for the PACE scheme if it is required. Can I ask the Minister if he's established whether the HMRC Crown Preference rules, which came into force yesterday, had any bearing in the decision by Arcadia to go into administration on Monday, and has he calculated how much HMRC stand to lose as a result?
That's not something, any information I have or consideration I've had as yet.
Let's head to Derbyshire. Nigel Mills. Nigel Mills.
Thank you. Would you agree that the best way to save these businesses is for people to keep shopping at them? So can you ensure everyone that their rights are protected if they buy vouchers or shop online or want to return items after Christmas?
It's a really important role. First of all, yes, he's absolutely right in terms of the people, these businesses want people to trade. But both Arcadia and Debenhams at the moment have said that they will accept vouchers. I would encourage anybody who is shopping at any of the stores at the moment, if they're spending more than £100, to use their credit card, because then the Consumer Payment Consumer Credit Act kicks in at that point. So, but at this moment, vouchers are accepted.
Blair Anderson.
Will the Minister accept that Putney High Street is a very much loved centre of our local community, but shops in Putney High Street are very, very concerned about the fact that COVID is accelerating the amount of shops that are going? Will he look at reform of the business rates, but also a reform of the meanwhile use rules, so we can have more community activities in our shops on the high street?
There's already a really good community in Putney. I was there a few months ago with the Business Improvement District there, and absolutely, the more we can strip away in terms of encouraging innovation through meanwhile use, the better. And in terms of the business rates, I've talked about the fundamental review of business rates. I hope the underlying is fundamental review. It's important that we look at the whole thing.
Let's head to Robert Halfon. Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Harlow, we have an excellent top shop that has done very well, and clearly the staff are worried about their pensions and their jobs. Surely the time has come for legislation to stop these robber barons who own these big companies, who plunder the assets, and then the taxpayers left to foot the bill, and you just have anxious employees losing their jobs and their pensions. We should make sure we seize the assets of those big vulture capitalists and get the money that the hardworking employees deserve.
He raises some important points, and there is already legislation and regulation in place to look at this. And this is why my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, has written to the administrators to make sure that they can expedite the report, looking at directors' behaviour, not just in the immediate weeks, but also looking back to see if there's anything untoward happened.
Let's head to Liverpool with Ian Byrne. Ian Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The job losses resulting from what's happening at Arcadia and Debenhams is on top of a series of devastating job losses across the North West. Vacancies are scarce and people have few places left to turn. In Liverpool West Derby, we have had increases of over 100% in both youth unemployment and universal credit claimants since March. Will the government now commit to cancelling its heartless plans to cut universal credit, which will take £20 a week from struggling families in my constituency of Liverpool West Derby?
I know a number of people up and down this country have actually been, flipping the question slightly, have been appreciative of the government's increase on universal credit to make sure that we can help them through this particularly acute time. But clearly, as I say, we will continue to work not only to support people who are out of a job, but to make sure that we can create jobs and opportunities for them to get back into good work.
Retail is at the heart of our local high streets, and the government's huge programme of support has been vital in keeping it going. But will he join me in encouraging my constituents to back Barnet and come out and shop local on Small Business Saturday?
My right honourable friend absolutely nails it, as usual, in supporting her independent retailers as small businesses, because these are the backbone. 99.7 businesses in this country are small businesses and SMEs. So she's absolutely right, and I do encourage everybody, both in Barnet but across the country, to shop local and get out there and spend money where possible to make sure there's a high street to enjoy for years to come.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Arcadia entering administration and Debenhams going into liquidation is devastating news, with thousands facing the risk of losing their jobs. But this is also an issue agreed with Philip Green having paid his family a tax-free dividend almost 3.5 times more than Arcadia's current pension pot deficit. So does the Minister agree that while Philip Green retains his fortune, that employees should not end up paying the price with their pensions?
Well, the honourable gentleman raises an important point, and clearly, as I say, the pension regulator has significant powers here, and we will make sure that the pension regulator has the space and ability to do its job.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My heart goes out to all those affected by the collapse of Arcadia and Debenhams, both of which affect my Workington constituency, particularly Workington Town Centre with the Debenhams anchor. Alongside the Stronger Towns Fund, this government's Future High Streets Fund will be crucial for helping town centres not only recover but adapt in the future. In light of unprecedented challenges this year, can my honourable friend confirm that Future High Street Fund's decisions are imminent and that the government will get the cash out of the door quickly so they can have a positive impact as soon as possible?
I thank my honourable friend and his work in to support Workington. And yes, the Struggle Towns Fund and the Future High Street Fund are both two really important instruments in making sure that we have a high streets up and down the country that can survive and thrive and that we can be proud of. And we will make sure that those announcements are forthcoming as soon as possible.
Stephen Fleet. Mr. Speaker, as Arcadia collapses and jobs are put on the line in Aberdeen and across the country, Amazon pays less than £300 million worth of tax and almost £14 billion worth of revenue. Does the Minister therefore agree that in order to protect our city centres we need a level playing field and the government must toughen up its digital services tax?
This is an important a situation where our hearts must all go out, as they have today, for the employees of both Arcadia and Debenhams. But in terms of online sales tax, this is something that we will look at with the fundamental business rates review, because it's important that our high streets can survive, but understanding that online businesses have an important role to play, but they must pay their fair share of taxes.
What policy?
Speaker, the challenges that Arcadia and Debenhams face existed before COVID but have been accelerated by it as people move online. The Minister's outlined the very substantial support that the government is providing to retailers, but to follow the question from the gentleman opposite, should the government go further and consider levelling the playing field between bricks and mortar and online retailers by considering an online sales tax?
I think an online sales tax is one consideration that the Treasury will look at, but it's more than that as well, because it's to make sure that actually, in terms of the fundamental business rates review, that there is a connection between businesses, bricks and mortar retailers and their place, rather than just the customers themselves. So there's an important body of work to be done, and I know the Treasury will have heard the comments and views today.
In order to allow the safe exit of vulnerable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, suspend the House for 3 minutes. Order.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with permission, I'd like to make a statement about the coronavirus vaccine. Today marks a new chapter in our fight against this virus. Ever since the pandemic hit our shores almost a year ago, we have known that a vaccine would be critical to set us free. So all through this arduous year, and it has been an arduous year, while we've been working night and day to fight the virus and keep it under control, we've been striving to develop the vaccines that can give us hope and let us eventually release the curbs on our freedoms that have bound us for so long. Thanks to the incredible work of the Vaccines Task Force, the Business Secretary and Kate Bingham, we've already amassed a huge portfolio of different vaccine candidates. We've backed 7 vaccines and ordered 357 million doses on behalf of the whole UK, one of the biggest portfolios per capita in the world. We've said from the start that a vaccine must be safe and effective before we'd even consider deploying it. Any vaccine must go through a rigorous process of clinical trials involving thousands of people and extensive independent scrutiny from the MHRA, one of the world's most respected medical regulators. Today, I'm delighted to inform the House that the MHRA has issued the clinical authorization of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. This is a monumental step forward. It's no longer if there's going to be a vaccine, it's when. In our battle against the virus, help is on its way. Today is a triumph for all those who believe in science, a triumph for ingenuity, a triumph for humanity, and I want to thank everyone who's played their part in this achievement. The team at Pfizer, the team of scientists at BioNTech, the volunteers who stepped up and took part in clinical trials, and to the MHRA themselves, who've made sure that this is a vaccine that we can all have faith in. Thanks to their efforts, I can confirm that the UK is the first country in the world to have a clinically approved coronavirus vaccine for supply. And now our task is to make use of the fruits of this scientific endeavour to save lives. Mr. Speaker, we've spent months preparing for this day so that as soon as we got the green light, we would be ready to go. We were the first country in the world to pre-order supplies of this successful vaccine, and we have 40 million doses pre-ordered for delivery over the coming months, enough for 20 million people because 2 jabs are required for each. Following authorization, the next stage is to test each batch of the vaccine for safety, and I can confirm that batch testing has been completed this morning for the first deployment of 800,000 doses of the vaccine. These doses are for the whole United Kingdom. This morning I chaired a meeting of health ministers from the devolved administrations to ensure the rollout is coordinated nationwide. This will be one of the biggest civilian logistical efforts that we've faced as a nation. It will be difficult, there will be challenges and complications, but I know that the NHS is equal to the task. Rolling out the vaccine, free at the point of delivery, according to clinical need, not ability to pay, is in the finest tradition of our National Health Service. And I'm delighted to confirm that the NHS will be able to start vaccinating from early next week. The whole purpose of the vaccine is to protect people from COVID so we can get lives back to normal. So we will prioritise the groups who are at greatest risk. This morning, the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation has published its advice, setting out the order of priority according to that clinical need. And this includes the care home residents and their carers, the over 80s, the frontline health and social care workers, and we will deliver according to clinical prioritisation and operational necessity because of the need to hold the vaccine at -70. It makes this vaccine particularly challenging to deploy. And while we begin vaccination next week, the bulk of the vaccinations will be in the new year, but I would urge anyone called forward for vaccination by the NHS to respond quickly to protect themselves, their loved ones and their community. Mr. Speaker, over the next few months, we will see vaccines delivered in 3 different ways. First, we will begin vaccinations in hospital hubs. Second, we'll deploy through local community services, including GPs and in due course pharmacies too. And third, we'll stand up vaccination centres in conference centres and sports venues, for example, to vaccinate large numbers of people as more vaccines come on stream. This is an important step, but we are not there yet. And so I want to stress that we must all keep playing our part, keep following the new rules that the House approved overwhelmingly yesterday, and remember the basics like hands, face, space, and get a test that we know from experience are so important in keeping the virus under control. Before I finish, Mr. Speaker, may I also update the House on another bit of good news? From today, I'm absolutely thrilled to say that we can safely allow visits in care homes for those who test negative for COVID-19. Coronavirus has denied so many people the simple pleasure of seeing a loved one, which is so precious to so many, especially in our care homes. This is only possible because of the success we've had in building one of the biggest testing capacities in Europe and working with local and national teams working together side by side, something we've often discussed right across this House. We've worked hard on testing, we've worked hard on the vaccine. Our strategy of suppressing the virus until a vaccine can make us safe, that strategy is working. And I'm delighted that we'll be able to see families and friends come together ahead of Christmas thanks to this improvement. Mr. Speaker, this is a day to remember, frankly, in a year to forget. We can see the way out of this, but we're not there yet, so let's keep our resolve, keep doing our bit to keep people safe until science can make us free.
Shadow Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and as always, I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement. This is indeed fantastic news about the Pfizer vaccine, and I want to join with the Secretary of State in congratulating all who have been involved in making this happen. We have rightly clapped carers throughout this crisis, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if we should as a nation come together and applaud our scientists as well one evening. And it's also incumbent upon all of us across this House to reinforce the case that vaccination saves lives. And if it helps, I will stand alongside the Secretary of State, socially distanced of course, on any platform or in any TV studio to show that we are united cross-party in promoting vaccination. Now, Mr. Speaker, our constituents will have legitimate questions, and they shouldn't be ridiculed for asking legitimate questions. So will he launch a large-scale public information campaign to answer questions and encourage uptake? Will he consider sending a pamphlet, perhaps, to every household? Now, we know that dangerous myths circulate on social media, and we repeat our offer to work with ministers to curb online harms, and I hope we can work together and take something forward on that front. Hospital trust staff will start receiving this vaccine first. I understand it's a massive logistical exercise given the temperatures and the need for 2 doses. But could he tell us how many NHS staff he expects to be vaccinated by January, of course, the time when we expect the NHS to be under most pressure? But also, where does this leave social care and care home residents and staff? There are concerns that this particular vaccine cannot be moved multiple times to care homes. So can the Secretary of State set out exactly how and when care home residents will receive a vaccine? And our constituents will want to know, when will primary care networks start rolling out vaccination? And when will the mass vaccination centres he's reported to the House start opening in our communities? Now, we have historic strengths as a country with vaccination, but in recent years we've actually lost our measles-free status because we know vaccination rates can be lower in poorer and vulnerable communities. And we know that COVID has had disproportionate impact often in these communities. So will he ensure there's a health inequality strategy as well in his vaccination campaign, so black and minority ethnic groups and the poorest and the vulnerable don't miss out on this vaccine? I think we all understand, Mr. Speaker, that restrictions will have to remain in place for some time. But can he offer us a time frame or a target for when we should expect to achieve herd immunity and life gets back to normal? Will he consider publishing a route map of what restrictions could be released as vaccination rates increase? And in the meantime, if someone is vaccinated, will they still have to isolate if contacted by test and trace, or are they now released from that obligation. Just on mass testing very quickly, Mr Speaker, some directors of public health have told me that the lateral flow tests are not licensed for door-to-door testing in hotspots and therefore can only be administered at sites. If that's correct, can he resolve it? If it's not correct, can he issue urgent clarity to directors of public health? And in the government's document published on Monday, it suggests that local areas could use mass testing as a freedom pass. Could he outline to the House what that means in practice? Will local areas enforce rules? What happens if some people are able to follow, have had the test and not had the test in a particular area that is supposed to be under Tier 3? And in the House yesterday, the Prime Minister suggested that people may want to take advantage of mass testing ahead of visiting their families this Christmas. Could he update the House on whether that is the plan and how will that be implemented? We of course welcome his news on care homes, but many care homes report that they'll need resources to support this testing exercise. Will those resources be in place? And very finally, Mr Speaker, if mass testing is to work in these communities, people will need support to isolate if they are found that they've got COVID when they are not feeling unwell. Will he now expand the eligibility criteria for the £500 grant? But this is a good news day, and we should all pay tribute to everybody who was involved. We should pay tribute to the scientists, and I say again, we will work together to make the case that vaccinations save lives.
Secretary of State.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, if I may, the honourable gentleman has worked supportively and constructively with the government throughout this pandemic, and I pay tribute to the approach that he's taken and that he took again today. I stand with him in saying vaccinations save lives, and if we can together encourage anybody to take a vaccine who may be hesitant by appearing together and being vaccinated together, then of course I'd be happy to do that. I recommend, Mr. Speaker, that we have a professional vaccinating us, of course. I don't think he'd trust me to do that. He asked for a public information campaign, and there will, of course, be a public information campaign. And he asked about health inequalities, which is a very important consideration. Of course, the best thing to support tackling health inequalities is the fact we have a vaccine, but we absolutely need to try to reach all parts and all communities across the whole country. He asked how many will be vaccinated by January. And while today brings more certainty, Mr. Speaker, it doesn't end all uncertainties, because while we have 800,000 that have now passed the batch testing, the total number that will be manufactured over this time frame is not yet known, because it's all dependent on a manufacturing process which is complicated itself. After all, this isn't a chemical, it's a biological product. So I can't answer that question. That is as yet unknowable. He asked when the PCNs and the centres will open. The answer is very soon. We have 50 hospital hubs ready to go from next week. The PCNs are also being stood up, and the centres, which are the centres outside of hospitals, and these are all coming very soon. He then asks about when we'll get to lift restrictions. And of course, I understand not only why he, but almost everybody in the country wants to know the answer to this question, which is how many people do you have to vaccinate before you can start lifting the restrictions? And the answer to that is that while we know that the vaccine protects you as an individual, with a 95% efficacy, we do not know the impact of the vaccine on reducing the transmission, because of the problem of asymptomatic transmission, which has been so bedeviled our response to this virus and made it so hard to tackle. Therefore, we don't know the answer to that question. But what we will do is follow the same 5 indicators that we were discussing at length yesterday, which are the indicators of the spread of the disease. We'll look at the cases, the hospitalizations, and of course the number of people who die with COVID. And we would hope very much, as we vaccinate more and more vulnerable people, that we will see those rates come down, and therefore we'll be able to lift the restrictions. So we will have to see how the vaccination programme impacts directly on the epidemic, and then, of course, move as swiftly as we safely can to lift the restrictions that we all want to see gone. He asked about the point on the community testing being licensed from door to door. I haven't heard that problem, and I will make sure that I get back not only to him but also to those who raised it with him, if he'll work with me on that. I'm a bit surprised. The lateral flow tests do need a professional to administer currently, although we hope that we can move further than that. But that can be in any setting, as far as I know. So I'm a bit surprised to hear that. But since it came from a public health professional, I'll dig into it further. Finally, he talked about the testing prospectus that we launched on Monday. We do hope to be able to use testing to do more things that we wouldn't be able to do without the testing. In a way, the visits to care homes are an example of that. That is something that we now can safely recommend that we couldn't recommend before. So too is test to release on quarantine for people coming into this country. And if there are further examples that can be safely done of this sort of enablement of normal life through the use of testing that can be approved by a Director of Public Health and by the Chief Medical Officer and his team, then we are very enthusiastic about working with local areas to deliver that on the ground. There's lots of ideas out there, and I would urge people to be creative about how we can do this in a way that enables some of the things that we love to get going again, but does so in a way that also keeps people safe. That's what that part of the testing prospectus was about. I'm very enthusiastic about it and look forward to working with directors of public health and with colleagues, because the Prime Minister also said this yesterday. He said, with this rollout of mass testing and the availability of these tests, we all, as leaders in our local communities, have got a role for promoting the role of mass testing. And I'm sure that there are communities right across the country represented in this House who can benefit from this rollout. There's many people looking around the chamber right now who have already approached me, Mr. Speaker, not just in Lancashire, and I will, and I look forward to working with colleagues right across this House to promote this public health message, amongst all the other important public health messages that we have to promote. Not least that if the NHS phones you up or sends you a letter and says that there is a vaccination slot open to you, then just say yes.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I congratulate my right honourable friend on this moment and the government for the news about the Pfizer vaccine. But please, can we continue to have increased honesty about what we still don't know, that we don't know how long the immunity will last. We don't even know if you are vaccinated whether you can still transmit the disease. And of course, we don't know if Tier 2 will actually succeed in bringing the R rate down. And until we can answer those questions, we still need maximum effort behind contact tracing and isolation of virus spreaders. Councils like Essex need daily access to all the positive cases recorded by NHS Test and Trace immediately and without delay in order to make their own operations effective. So why are they having to wait 48 to 72 hours before they get the data? And what is the government going to do to engage districts and their community volunteer hubs to help people to persuade people to support people who still must isolate, even if they have been vaccinated?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, dealing with this pandemic has been a case of dealing with uncertainty in large degree. And today we have more certainty because we know that this vaccine is safe and effective. But just as I was saying to the honourable member opposite, that we don't know the effect of the vaccine on transmission, so we, as my right honourable friend says, we don't know the effect of the vaccine in terms of its longevity, how long it will be effective for. He's quite right about another part of public health advice that we can all play a part in as local representatives, and that is the engagement with contact tracing. I will write to him on the point about the access to daily data in Essex. Of course, we have to wait until the test result comes in, which can sometimes lead to a delay, even though now the majority of tests that are done in person do come back within 24 hours. But I agree with him in principle, and let's make that reality in practice.
Let's head up to Scotland with SNP spokesperson Dr Philippa Whitford. Dr Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. As chair of the all-party group on vaccination, I absolutely welcome the authorisation of the Pfizer vaccine and would echo the Shadow Secretary's call for a public health campaign to encourage uptake. It will naturally take some time before it's widely available, so we all still need to stick to the rules and ensure we can test, trace, isolate and support all those carrying the virus. Last week, the Secretary of State claimed the pilot project of mass testing in Liverpool was responsible for driving down cases, despite the city having been under lockdown for much of the time. Lateral flow tests miss up to 40% of cases, so the government's plan to use them to free people from isolation are causing concern among many public health and screening experts. So when will the formal assessment of the pilot be published? And how can he justify already putting out tenders for £40 billion of contracts to extend this approach without scientific evaluation? Would it not be better to invest some of this money in getting the traditional test, trace and isolate system working properly? As 6 months on, the Serco and Citel system has still not improved, and over 40% of contacts in England are still not being informed they should be isolating. He doesn't often talk about it, but he knows it's not testing, but isolation which actually stops the spread of the virus. So if people who are carrying the virus are not isolating, no amount of mass testing will stop its spread. When I raised the King's College report last week that less than 20% of cases and only 10% of contacts were isolating, the Secretary of State claimed the government has data showing much higher compliance. So can he tell us the figures for isolation rates for those with COVID and their contacts? People won't stay off work if it means they can't feed their family. So is he concerned at reports that many requests for the isolation payment are being refused? And how will he ensure that those carrying the virus are financially supported to isolate and reduce its spread?
Thanks very much. Well, the Honourable Lady says that I don't talk about contact tracing very much. I was literally answering a question on contact tracing in the previous intervention, Mr. Speaker. I talk of little else. She asks also about the questions. We are publishing further data tomorrow on contact tracing, precisely in response to the question that she asked, and she'll see that the continued improvement of our contact tracing across the country is advancing further, and we'll see that in the. I can't say any more than that because the figures aren't released until tomorrow. She asked about scientific evaluation. Absolutely, we're constantly scientifically evaluating the work that's going on, especially in Liverpool. That's one of the things that the scientists who work as part of my team and who work in NHS Test and Trace and work in Public Health England, that's one of the things they do. It's a matter of constant scientific evaluation, but what we won't do is wait ages after something has finished to then do an overly long evaluation. What we do is we have to evaluate as we're going along, and we have to do that because we're constantly trying to improve the response to this pandemic, and we're constantly trying to learn. And I would urge her to support the approach of constant learning and constant improvement. We're going to have to do that through the rollout of the vaccine too. She shakes her head, but that's how you have to deal with a pandemic in practice.
Chair of the Select Committee, Jeremy Hunt.
Mr. Speaker, this is a huge personal triumph for the Health Secretary, who has always backed the science, and in choosing
and backing on behalf of the country the first vaccine to prove efficacious. He has scored a massive goal for the country. He deserves great credit for that, and it will also have global significance. I was in a meeting with the World Health Organization this morning who congratulated the UK on being the first country to approve a vaccine because it will help encourage other countries around the world to approve vaccines faster. I want to ask him, if I may, about something different, which is the plight of people with learning disabilities. He will know that Public Health England say that they are 2 to 4 times more likely to die from COVID. And the news that he's given this morning about people in care homes is tremendously welcome. But people with learning disabilities often feel that they are forgotten, particularly if they're in supported accommodation. And I wonder whether he could redouble his efforts to make sure that they too are able to be reunited with their families ahead of Christmas.
Well, my right honourable friend is gracious and kind in what he says. And I welcome the comments from the World Health Organization this morning, who've supported the UK approach and commended, rightly, the MHRA, our independent regulator, who have followed all of the same steps that any regulator, any high-quality regulator would and should and will. But what they've done is done them rapidly and sometimes in parallel instead of one after the other. And that's how we've got to the position of being the first country in the world to have a vaccine that is clinically authorised. It's because the MHRA has done a brilliant job working with Pfizer and BioNTech to make sure the same safety considerations are looked at, but they're looked at in a way that essentially made the process as fast as is feasibly and safely possible. And the WHO has backed that approach, and I think regulators around the world could take a look at the MHRA, and we should all congratulate them. He rightly asks about making sure that we vaccinate those with learning disabilities and offer them vaccination at the right point in the prioritisation. This is an important consideration that I've discussed directly with the JCVI, who take into account the higher mortality of those with any given condition and have done that within the prioritisation that they set out this morning. Age is the single biggest determinant of mortality from coronavirus. That's why age is the predominant factor in the prioritisation, but it's not the only factor. And so that has been considered by the JCVI, and I think it's very important that we accept and follow the JCVI advice as much as is practicable in the delivery and deployment of this vaccine.
Munira Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it is indeed a fantastic day. And could I add my thanks and congratulations to everybody who's been involved in getting us to this point, not just in the UK but worldwide, because this is a great example of global scientific collaboration. Could I pick up the point about batch testing? The Secretary of State mentioned it on the radio this morning and in his statement. Could he clarify that if we signed up to a mutual recognition agreement with the EU, then we wouldn't need to batch test the vaccine again once it arrives in the UK, which could perhaps slow down the process, not least because in terms of having enough qualified persons who can do the batch release testing could be a real challenge. So is he working on a mutual recognition agreement?
Thank you very much. Well, we have that mutual recognition agreement in place now. And she's right to point to the global scientific work. Work between UK scientists and scientists based in the UK, of course German scientists at BioNTech, the American scientists and the Belgians who are producing and manufacturing this vaccine. It is an approach that has been about people coming together right around the world, and the UK has put more into the global search for a vaccine in cash terms than any other country. Despite our medium size as a nation, we have been the most generous, and I'm really proud of that.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's great news about the vaccine, and on behalf of the residents of Ashford and Eastwood, a big thanks to the Health Secretary, the scientists and the pharmaceutical companies. The small businesses in Ashford and Eastwood have taken a massive financial hit during lockdown, despite doing their very best to be COVID secure. Meanwhile, supermarkets have recorded record profits. I've received lots of complaints this week from customers and staff at local supermarkets who say the stores are overcrowded and not COVID safe. And this is happening all over the country and is unfair to the small businesses who have been hit the hardest. So whilst the UK is being vaccinated, in the run-up to Christmas, traders in my constituency will do their very best to beat the virus. So could my right honourable friend please remind the supermarket executives that they have a duty to protect their staff, customers, our NHS and the whole of the UK in order to beat the virus and get our lives back.
Yes, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very happy to remind from this dispatch box the supermarkets of their responsibilities to follow COVID secure guidelines and ensure they're in place for their customers and their staff. And I also want to pay tribute to the honourable gentleman for standing up for the small businesses of Ashfield. It is tough in Ashfield at the moment, I get that. We have the restrictions in place only because they are absolutely necessary. And I know that he understands that, and he's a strong voice for the small businesses of Ashfield and indeed all the residents of Ashfield in this chamber.
Jim Shannon.
Deputy Speaker, can I also, what a joy it was to see in the news at 7 o'clock this morning the news being broken and see the Secretary of State as well. I'd like to put on record my thanks to the Secretary of State and all his team for making this happen, and thank you. Is the Secretary of State aware that there are still those who are unable to access their flu vaccine? What steps have been taken to ensure that the flu vaccine rollout is completed before the Corona programme begins? And what discussions has the Secretary of State had with the Northern Ireland Assembly to provide vaccines and, more importantly, the rollout for our vulnerable and frontline key workers? Thank you.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his kind words, and it has been a big team effort, I echo his thanks to the whole team. On the flu vaccine, we have a further tranche of flu vaccine ready to go, and that's just about to be rolled out. Making sure that we get flu vaccine available right across the UK is very important. It's an issue that Robin Swan, my opposite number in the Northern Ireland administration, and I have worked on extensively. And he is incredibly diligent in ensuring that we get the flu vaccine rolled out to Northern Ireland. There is an interaction between, of course, the massive flu vaccine rollout programme, which the NHS does every year, but this year is bigger than ever, and at the same time having to do a COVID vaccine rollout. We've taken that into account in the plans. And in fact, before the announcement at 6:30 this morning, I was talking to Robin Swan on the phone, which shows how hard-working he is.
Raymond Chiston.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Secretary of State for all his hard work and congratulate him, the government and all the scientists on the approval of the vaccine. The Secretary of State will know that Medway and neighbouring Swell, both of which are served by Medway Hospital in my constituency, are currently recording the first and the second highest COVID rates in the country. And parts of Gillingham are recording rates as high as 753 per 100,000 people. I thank the Secretary of State for listening to representations from my local authority and myself and other local MPs for providing military aid assistance on rapid testing to Medway. The Secretary of State also knows Medway has some of the highest health inequalities in the country, and health inequalities are linked to high rates. Will you join me and pay tribute to the fantastic work of the hospital and its staff in helping local residents?
Yes, I will, Madam Deputy Speaker. And there is a very significant problem with the epidemic in Medway and North Kent. And I know that my honourable friend is very concerned about this. I pay tribute to those working on the front line at Medway Hospital, which is one of the most pressured hospitals in the country at the moment, and also thank other parts of Kent and other trusts across Kent for providing mutual aid. We've got to get this virus under control in Medway and across North Kent. The way to do that is for everybody to abide by the Tier 3 restrictions and to do everything they can to ensure they don't pass on the disease. And then we can get these cases coming down. We are also, at the same time, going to inject a huge number of tests into Medway. We're working closely with Medway Council on this, and we will be using the armed forces to help make it happen, because we've got to get this virus under control in Medway.
Tracy Braben.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I add my thanks as well to the scientists, but also to the volunteers who put their own health at risk so that we could beat this pandemic. In my constituency, we've been under quite enhanced restrictions for many, many months now. And the community has worked with the councils and others. And finally, we've had a drop in infections of 41% in the last week. But we need to go further to get out of restrictions. And part of that is mass testing. So can the Minister clarify my understanding that mass testing, you get £14 per person per head for mass testing, but you don't get those boots on the ground from the army. You get logistical advice and support and not physical help. We can't do mass testing on the cheap. So can the Minister confirm that he will give the resources to the councils? And is mass testing going to roll out before February 2021?
Oh yes, Madam Deputy Speaker, mass testing is rolling out as we speak. My team have been working with Kirklees Council to make sure that their enthusiasm for mass testing is matched by the resources that come their way, both in terms of the tests themselves and in terms of the financial support, as she says, £14 per test, and the logistical support from the armed forces. I think that Kirklees' plans are very advanced. I pay tribute to their leadership and look forward to working with them to make it happen.
Order. I do want to be able to get everybody in, but we are getting a little behind schedule. So I would ask for succinct questions. Thank you. Goga Mahindra.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I firstly congratulate the Secretary of State and our government for the brilliant work they've done in making sure that we were the first country in the world to have a vaccination approved. I think it's worth repeating, Secretary of State, if you may, the criteria and the pecking order to do with the 800,000 doses. A colleague of mine, Councillor Bentley, always says people need to hear things at least 8 times before they embed it. So can you take this opportunity to do so?
Yes. Absolutely. Look, we will follow a clinical prioritisation according to need, and that starts with those who are resident in care homes and their carers and the over 80s and NHS staff, and then essentially comes down the age range, including those who are clinically extremely vulnerable. We know, sadly, through the experience of the last 10 months, who is most likely to die of COVID, and they're the people who we'll try to get to first.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is hugely welcome news, and can I also pay tribute, as well as to the scientists, to all the teams in our local health boards who are preparing to deliver this vaccine, in particular Cardiff and Vale Health Board, Fiona Kinghorn and her team, and the armed forces who've been involved in this process as well. They've absolutely done an incredible job over the last few weeks to be ready for this delivery. But the Secretary of State said, crucially, this is a UK-wide effort. Can he give that cast iron guarantee that this tranche of vaccines, but also future tranches, will be available on a completely equitable basis across the United Kingdom so we can bear down this virus in every part of our country?
Yes, I can give that assurance. And can I join him in thanking the volunteers, who I should have thanked in response to an earlier question, and also thank in advance everybody in the NHS who's going to be involved in this rollout. It's going to be a mammoth effort. People are going to be working really hard this winter, when people already work hard during winter in the NHS, and I'm sure that the whole House is very grateful to them.
Greg Clark.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I join the Secretary of State in thanking for the brilliance and hard work the scientists that were involved in this major breakthrough, and can I join my right honourable friend in paying a personal tribute to the Secretary of State, who has been tenacious, positive and energetic right throughout this. And the fact that we're the first in the world, a lot of that is down to him. We need to keep the virus suppressed during the months ahead. And one of the problems with test and trace is that quite often people don't disclose all of their contacts because they don't want them to have to isolate for 2 weeks. Now, Sir John Bell, whom I know the Secretary of State admires as much as I do, he suggests that if we subject people who are isolated to 2 tests, and if they're both negative, they should be released. He thinks that will safely encourage people to share their contacts and suppress the spread of the virus. He's moved heaven and earth on vaccination. Will he do this for test and release?
Secretary
Well, it's a great day for science, and it's a great day to be chair of the Science Committee, I would have thought. I'm grateful to what my right honourable friend said, which was very generous. On the point about repeat testing instead of isolation for contacts, that is something that we're trialling right now, and I hope that we can make significant progress on it in the weeks ahead.
We now go to Geraint Davis.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you. Last Tuesday, the Prime Minister reassured me that government guidance would stop non-essential travel out of areas in Tier 2 or Tier 3 into less infected areas. However, the guidance, in fact, says that if you live in Tier 2 areas, you must continue to follow the Tier 2 rules when you travel to Tier 1 areas, which means you can travel from higher to lower infection areas, including to Wales. So will the Health Secretary update the guidance to comply with the Prime Minister's advice to stop non-essential travel from higher to lower infected areas ahead of the vaccine?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the guidance is precisely as set out on gov.uk.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I place on record my thanks to Kate Bingham and the Vaccines Task Force, as well as all government departments that have played their part in this welcome announcement, particularly that of my right honourable friend. Does my right honourable friend agree that as community testing and vaccines are rolled out throughout the winter and into the spring, the need for even localised restrictions will gradually reduce and life can begin to something closer to normality for my constituency in Workington?
I've got good news for the people of Workington and the whole country, which is that suppressing the virus using these restrictions until a vaccine came along has been the strategy all along, and we can just start to see that light at the end of the tunnel much brighter because we know we've now got a vaccine.
Claire Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I also welcome this news and thank all the scientists involved in this great breakthrough. And when it's my turn to have a vaccine, I will have absolutely no hesitation in doing so. And when it comes to terms, can the Secretary of State confirm that community workers, care workers that work in the community, who work home to home, will be part of the first assessment of clinical need? And then after clinical need, will educational need be a factor in keeping our schools open? A school in Southfields has been closed for the last 2 weeks for lack of teachers being able to teach. So as a next phase, will educational need be a consideration for the rollout of the vaccine?
Well, once we've got through the clinical priority, then of course there's a debate to be had about the next order of priority after that. But between now and then, I hope that the repeat testing of contacts will, if we can get that up and running and working across the board, I hope that that will be effective in ensuring that fewer teachers have to isolate because they're contacts as opposed to positive cases.
Now go to Mary Robinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate my right honourable friend for securing this vaccine and his amazing success in preparing us for its speedy rollout. This is indeed a good news day. And the news that hospital staff, care workers and patients will be among the first to receive it will be welcomed in my local hospital and across our care sector, and we're keen to make a start. Meanwhile, as the vaccine rolls out to other groups, would my right honourable friend consider introducing rapid targeted testing at scale in Stockport and across Greater Manchester as we continue to drive down our COVID rates and work together to beat this virus?
Yes, I will. Let's work together and make that happen with Stockport Council as well, and try to get those rates right down even further than they already are.
We now go to Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I echo the congratulations to all involved with the good news about this vaccination. Last week, I asked the Secretary of State to publish the modelling he has on the effect of relaxing the rules over Christmas on transmission of COVID-19. Yesterday, I was told that it was not possible to answer yet. Now, that seems quite extraordinary. Has the Secretary of State been given an estimate of how many additional deaths are likely to be caused by the loosening of restrictions over Christmas? If he knows the answer, I ask if he could tell us that now. And if he doesn't know the answer, why would he be making such a major decision without any idea of the number of deaths that could result?
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. We have to make judgments based on what is right and balancing the different considerations that you have to take into account, including the yearning that many people have to come together at Christmas and try to find a balanced way through. We did that working with the devolved authorities, and I'm very glad that we came to a UK-wide approach to Christmas, taking into account all the considerations that were necessary.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I add my voice of congratulation to my right honourable friend, the scientists, the pharmaceutical companies and everybody involved in today's good news of securing that vaccine. But my right honourable friend will know my deep reservations on the severity of the restrictions being placed through the new tier system on my constituents, and I'm grateful for the time he took to discuss this with me yesterday. And a big part of my reluctant decision to vote with the government last night was the promise of more granularity when it comes to the review on the 16th of December. Can he therefore confirm that the Buckingham constituency can be considered if the numbers continue to come down to be in Tier 1 before Christmas?
Yes, I enjoyed the conversations that I had with my honourable friend on the approach to the division lobby, and I can confirm the answer to his question is yes.
Rachel Maskell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I also congratulate the scientific community on their achievements today. But will the Secretary of State look with precision at the York model of delivering contact tracing? It's been a phenomenal story where precision contact tracing interviews has reduced that rate right down. They need the information on day one, not after 48 hours, which is being held back, but they also need to ensure that they get payments and support for people isolating. It works. So will the Secretary of State now follow that model?
Not only follow the model, we'll promote it. The link between the local authority and the national system in York has indeed had the effect that she rightly describes, and the teamwork between the two has meant, I was looking at the figures this morning, that the figures in York are coming right down, pay tribute to everybody in York, and it's an example of the national and local systems working together. We've got to get the case rates right down all the way across North Yorkshire, Madam Deputy Speaker, and indeed everywhere in Yorkshire, and I'm sure that we can.
Withdrawn, so straight to Stephanie Peacock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Barnsley has fewer GPs than areas down south, so can the Secretary of State explain his plan to make sure that places like my constituency are not left behind in the rollout of the vaccine?
Yes, of course. GPs, as well as pharmacists and the hospital hubs and the vaccination centres, are the three routes to getting a vaccine, and we'll do it through the primary care networks, which are groups of GPs, and we'll make sure that it's equitable right across the country. It's so important, not only between England and the devolved nations, but within England, having the rollout fair right across the land.
Dr. James Davis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It certainly is extremely good news on the vaccination announcement today. My right honourable friend has already outlined that there will be equitable provision of the vaccine across the United Kingdom. Will he do the same for community mass testing? And will he outline the logistics involved in getting both the vaccines and those community mass testing kits to Wales? Thank you.
Yes, as a GP, my honourable friend understands this area more than most, and we are working with the Welsh administration to try to get community testing throughout Wales. We're working in Merthyr Tydfil right now to get the case rates down in Merthyr, and I'm very happy to work with him and with the Welsh administration and local councils to try to make sure that we can get those case rates down wherever we can.
Now go to Martin Day.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As we await the welcome rollout of a vaccine, test and trace remains vitally important. And in Scotland, over 90% of cases and contacts are being reached, whereas in England, with reliance on Serco, it has barely seen 60% of contacts reached, far lower than needed to meaningfully limit the spread of COVID. So can the Minister advise what clauses are within the contracts regarding this failure to deliver, and what is he going to do about it?
I would just gently advise him and other SNP members not to try to make this comparison, because I've looked into this in some detail when somebody else raised it. And it turns out that the figures are only comparable if you strip out finding the contacts in places where it's easy to get the contacts, like care homes, because everybody who lives there you can easily account for. And so comparing apples and pears like this is not sensible, it's not right, and trying to drive a wedge between the public and private elements of the provision of this system, which, by the way, they have in Scotland as well, I think that's a mistake.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would also like to thank everyone involved in today's good news from North Devon. And my right honourable friend will know that the Nightingale in Exeter has now opened, but he will also know that we are seeing a large number of NHS staff absences across Devon. Can my right honourable friend assure me that the government is doing everything it can to keep staff safe and ensure we have enough staff to keep all hospitals in Devon running as they should?
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend is quite right to raise this important issue. And I'm glad to say that we have more staff working in the NHS in Devon over the last year, and we've increased the number of nurses nationally by over 14,000. But there are also those absent because of COVID. I hope that regular testing will help to bring this number down. And then, of course, there's the vaccine, which I hope will solve this problem once and for all.
Ben Bradshaw.
Much disappointment in Devon that we were put in Tier 2, although our rates are only 80 per 100,000 and coming down. So can you spell out exactly what has to happen in Devon over the next 2 weeks for us to move into Tier 1? And if this success, the phenomenal success of the York model in virtually eradicating COVID in York, is for the reasons he suggests, why isn't that being done elsewhere?
Well, we're very happy to work with Devon Council if they want to come forward for that sort of model. We're constantly learning from around the country, and these the local national partnerships actually often bring lessons because people have chosen to do things slightly differently in a local area, and we can all learn from that. What I'd say about Devon coming into Tier 1, Devon, of course, it does have lower rates than many places. It isn't the lowest area in Tier 2. That honour belongs to my own county of Suffolk. There are elevated numbers of cases in some parts of Devon, and what I would urge everybody in Devon to do to get into Tier 1 is to abide by the Tier 2 rules, and more than that, to take personal responsibility to do all they can to reduce the spread of the virus.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Well done to everybody involved with this triumph. I share the Secretary of State's concern over vaccine hesitancy, and he's right to say that everyone in this House has a duty to try to dispel it. Does he agree with me that had this House not taken the decision on the 16th of October to empower the nimble MHRA and leave regulation instead to the European Medicines Agency until the 31st of December, he would not be in the happy position that he's in today?
Yes, I'm very glad that we changed the law to allow the MHRA to make this authorisation on UK terms. This House voted unanimously to do that. Well, we didn't even have a vote. It went through without one. And I'm really glad that we were able to do that. And I just want to thank my right honourable friend for his support and encouragement throughout this. It's been a very, very long year as Health Secretary, and I really appreciate his support.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Health Secretary spoke about learning lessons and continuing to improve the system. My partner's daughter is currently self-isolating because someone in her class at school has got coronavirus. She comes home and lives with her sister, who was still expected to go to school. Surely a world-class testing system would be testing everyone in the bubble who's been sent home so that their immediate family could be either identify that they have got the virus or and take appropriate action or not. Is there any more that can be done to actually improve this so that people like my partner and many other parents at Hollymore Side School will be able to take the necessary steps?
Yes. We're piloting exactly that idea in, I think, 8 schools right now, and I hope to be able to roll it out once we've learnt from those pilots.
We now go to Carl McCartney.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And my right honourable friend will be aware that Lincoln has a high student population, something I'm very proud of, and our two universities are highly regarded. Quite a number of constituents have contacted me regarding the potential increase in cases when students return in January. What steps is my right honourable friend taking to support universities with this, and what further steps can be taken to support students who have to isolate, as often they are far away from loved ones who can support them with shopping, etc. And as a government, we must do all we can to ensure education continues as normal.
Yes, he's absolutely right. And just as students go home for Christmas, we're able to use the massive testing capacity that we've built up to ensure that they can go home safely. So we propose to use testing to allow students to return safely. It's rather like the previous answer I just gave about being able to use testing instead of isolation in schools. But I would just say this gently to the previous speaker, who, as he sat down, muttered about this. It is far better to work together, and it's only because of the massive testing capacity that we have built up through the actions of this government that this is possible. We have the biggest testing capacity in Europe, and we can use it for keeping people safe in schools and for allowing people to safely go to and from universities. And this is exactly the sort of empowerment that we can get through the huge testing programme that we've now built.
Liz Twist.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week we celebrated Carers' Rights Day, and today, with the priority list being issued by the Joint Committee on Vaccines, they're not included in that priority list. They do a huge job in looking after some of our more vulnerable people. Will you look again at that decision?
I'm very happy to ensure that the JCVI take all the appropriate considerations into account. However, it isn't my decision to look at again. My decision is that we should follow the clinical advice, and I think we should respect the JCVI, who are hugely expert in the clinical advice that they give.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Fantastic news about the vaccine, but we can't be complacent. The Kirklees Director of Public Health briefed me and other local MPs last night that Kirklees needs to be in Tier 3 right now. We were in the top 5 councils for COVID cases, but good local action combined with the national lockdown has helped reduce cases by 41%. Now, can the Health Secretary confirm that he will use localised data at the first review of the tiers on the 16th of December? So if we continue that progress, we might be able to come out of Tier 3. And in the meantime, will he also speak again to the Chancellor to see what extra financial support we can give to our pubs, restaurants and cafes at this challenging time?
Yes, well, of course, the Prime Minister announced extra funding for wet pubs yesterday. I'm very happy to have a further discussion on that matter, but I would also pay tribute to Kirklees, the people who live in Kirklees, and my honourable friends' constituents, because it has been tough and it's been a long time, and these measures have been in place for longer than almost anywhere else in the country, and these rates are now really coming down, and everybody should be very grateful for that.
Kevin Jones.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State talks a lot about partnership at local level, and 2 weeks ago his department contacted the local public health directors and asked them to draw up plans for care home testing. Last week his department sent out a letter directly to care homes bypassing those local directors of public health to introduce testing at those care homes. Can I ask why their approach was changed? And also, can he explain how the testing that's going to take place in local care homes, the data that got from that, how is it going to be fed through to local directors of public health to do local tracing?
Well, it is very important that tracing happens, and the data, as he knows, is fed through to councils where that data agreement has been put in place. And I think the best approach is for councils and the national system to work well together.
Andrew Griffith.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And will the Health Secretary and his colleagues accept my congratulations on making sure that the UK is one of the first countries in the world to have a deployable vaccine? Would he agree with me that businesses and their employees in the UK pharmaceutical sector that invests over £4 billion a year of private risk capital are heroes every bit as much as our wonderful NHS employees on the front line.
Absolutely, Madam Deputy Speaker. And this, the point that my honourable friend has made gives a lie to this idea that you should somehow split off public and private. I want to pay tribute on behalf of all those in this House who believe in private enterprise, for everybody, the major global pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer and AstraZeneca, the small entrepreneurial startups like BioNTech, and all those who have come to the aid of the nation. And if they do it and make a profit, if they do that to save lives, that's fine by me.
Chris Bryant.
Advent always starts with the prospect of good news, so this is a really good Advent, says the former vicar. Yes, quite. Can I just add one element to this issue of the prioritisation of vaccination, however, which is that COVID has savagely exposed the health inequalities across the whole of the country. The poorest communities have suffered most, and the poorest communities often have the fewest health services and the least additional capacity to be able to deliver vaccination. So as part of the mix, can we just make sure that equality, real equity across the whole of the country means that the poorest communities may need additional support?
Yes, and the honourable gentleman raises a point that's important for the vaccination programme, but it's important thereafter. Because if levelling up means anything, it means trying to level up health and make sure that the health inequalities of which he speaks are addressed.
34 withdrawn, so we go to Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think everyone involved in delivering this great news is to be congratulated, including the Secretary of State. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has said that provided we receive the first doses of the vaccine as soon as we're expecting them in Scotland, we can start vaccinating people on Tuesday next week. Will he join in applauding all of NHS Scotland who are going to make this possible?
Yes, I absolutely will, Madam Deputy Speaker. And our goal and our aim and the commitment and agreement between all four nations of the United Kingdom is that we will all start vaccination at the same time, fairly, across the four nations. That will happen early next week. When the announcement was made at 7 a.m, the one remaining regulatory hurdle was the batch testing. That has now been completed. So we are on track to deliver on that commitment, and it will be delivered through the NHS in all four corners of our land, and we're working closely together. I spoke to my opposite number in Scotland early this morning to make sure that we were as coordinated as possible. And this UK purchased vaccine being delivered by NHS Scotland is a really good example of the power of this country when we all work together.
To Alicia Cairns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The first country in the world to have a vaccine, a world-class testing programme, what a phenomenal achievement. I'd like to thank my right honourable friend and all those scientists and clinicians who've made today a reality. I'm pleased that before Christmas, we should have vaccine centres established in Oakham and in Melton Mowbray in my constituency. So please will he join me in extending his thanks to my local councils, our clinicians and residents for their enormously hard work to get ready to bring this vaccine to my communities.
Yes, I absolutely will, and I'll pay tribute to their work on preparing for the vaccine rollout and also their work in keeping the virus under control, which is such an important task, so difficult, and has consumed so much effort this year, yet there's still more work to be done over this winter to get the vaccine rolled out.
Angela Eagle.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. 2 injections per person for everyone in the country is going to take an awful long time. The Prime Minister was hoping it would be done by Easter. Does the Health Secretary share that timetable, or will he publish another one? And is he planning on making this vaccine available again next year, since we don't know how long immunity lasts? and COVID is likely to be endemic and with us for some time to come?
Yes, two incredibly important questions. The first of which the honourable gentleman on the front bench asked and I didn't answer, for which I apologise. The speed at which we can continue this rollout will be determined by the speed at which Pfizer can manufacture and whether the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine is approved by the MHRA, of which we have 100 million on order. So I'm afraid I can't answer her question on timetable, or indeed the honourable gentleman's, because it is dependent on the approval of AstraZeneca and the manufacturing process of the Pfizer vaccine. On the second question that she asks, I've completely forgotten what it was. Next year, yes. If this vaccine is only short term, one of the reasons that we have 357 million doses from 7 different vaccines is to be able to vaccinate another further doses if that's needed in due course, and whether that's through a reprocurement of one of the existing vaccines or by switching to a different vaccine if that is clinically appropriate. That is absolutely part of the potential future plans that we have under consideration, but it's too early to know the answer to that question as well.
Kevin Hollinrake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And wonderful news on the vaccine. Many congratulations to all involved, including the Secretary of State. But he will concede it'll be some months before restrictions can be lifted. North Yorkshire is the largest county in England by miles. It takes 3 hours to drive from one side of it to the other side of it. Will he consider the variation in infection rates are considerable across the region? Would he consider, when he moves tiers around, probably in 2 weeks' time, moving one of the 7 districts of North Yorkshire with low infection rates into Tier 1?
Well, as the Prime Minister said yesterday, we do look at the human geography of these and how the epidemiology shows the spread of the virus to be occurring across the country, including especially across the big rural counties, but not limited to that. We've got to be slightly careful in North Yorkshire. One of the challenged areas is Scarborough, where the case rates are elevated. I appreciate that is a long way from my honourable friend's patch, but it is so we do look at it at that granular level and make decisions on that basis. But the decision to put the whole of North Yorkshire into Tier 2 was taken actually looking at each part of North Yorkshire and on its merits in each part.
We now go to Margaret Greenwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Dr de Grucci, the President of the Association of Directors of Public Health, has said that it is completely incomprehensible that the government is not increasing the public health grant to local authorities for next year. She spoke of the importance of learning the lessons of how existing health inequalities have driven and exacerbated the impact of COVID-19, addressing the socio-economic determinants of health and giving public health teams the resources that they need to both continue the fight against COVID-19 and the longer term. So will the Secretary of State pay heed to this message, and will he call on the Chancellor to give local public health teams the funding that they need?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we are increasing the public health grant next year, and also the public health grant is but one part of the massive overall investment in public health that we've made this year, and that we will of course have to continue to make next year as we get this virus under control.
Last question, Sarah Bricklin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The news this morning about the vaccines gives my constituents of Hyndburn and Haslingden that light at the end of a very dark tunnel. And the announcement on care homes is genuinely brilliant news and is something that I've pushed for as a Secretary of State will know, both in and out of this chamber. But as has been mentioned, mass testing is also a vital part in our fight against coronavirus. So can the Secretary of State confirm when this will be rolled out in Tier 3 areas such as Hyndburn and Haslingden, so that we can continue to get our rate down and get our brilliant hospitality sector up again?
My honourable friend is right. The candle of hope is burning brighter today. And on the mass testing that she is so enthusiastic about, I can tell her that this morning, when I asked my officials to ensure that the community testing programme that's being developed for Hyndburn is advanced as quickly as possible, they told me that they had been They'd been told of the need for this by so many people, and so many people had been lobbied by the Honourable Lady that it was already in hand. And I suppose, Madam Deputy Speaker, that goes to show, just how vociferous my honourable friend is in fighting for the people of Hyndburn.
Order. Thank you. 3 minutes suspension for Keely. Order, order. We now come to the 10-minute rule motion. Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to require the installation of automated external defibrillators in public buildings, sporting facilities, schools, higher education and other education and skills facilities, and facilities that provide care to vulnerable people, and to make associated provision about training and signage. This is the third attempt to bring in a bill of this nature, following two previous efforts by my honourable friend, the member for Lewes. Can I put on record my thanks to the honourable lady for her efforts and commitment? And I was happy to co-sponsor her bill in 2018, which failed due to Parliament dissolving. I stand today to once more inform the House that the push for mandatory installation of these life-saving devices in our public buildings is one that must be absolutely welcomed. As a member for Strangford in Northern Ireland, I feel it is right that I take this opportunity today to present this bill, because the defibrillator, of course, was invented by Professor Frank Partridge, who was born in Hillsborough in the constituency of my right honourable friend for Lagan Valley, and he pioneered the AED, or the portable defibrillator, at the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast in collaboration with the British Heart Foundation. Behind this bill lies stories of tragedy and triumph, and these stories must be shared because they have happened across the whole of the community. In December 2019, I met Mark King, whose son Oliver died in March 2011 from a cardiac arrest while taking part in a swimming race. Oliver was 12 years old, an outstanding young athlete and a very much loved little boy, who unfortunately had a hidden heart condition
and had a defibrillator been quickly available, his chances of survival would have been so much greater. It is possible he would have been here to celebrate his 21st birthday back in January of this year. It is because the defibrillator was not available, because it is still not mandatory for any building to have one, that Oliver's death inspired his daddy, Mark King, to set up the Oliver King Foundation, which has worked since 2012 to save as many lives as possible through raising awareness of the importance of public access defibrillators. The Foundation has to date placed 4,500 AEDs in schools and organisations across the United Kingdom, trained 70,000 staff in AED awareness, and over 47 lives have since been saved by the defibrillators that the Foundation have placed. This has been achieved through effort born from heartbreak. As a government, it is time we removed this burden from their shoulders and require that mandatory installation of AEDs be Oliver King's legacy. Members may not be aware that 270 children die across the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland each year from hidden heart conditions, that many have died in school settings and sports fields, and these places are where defibrillators need to be. They need to be there not simply because someone has fundraised in their community, but because they are required to be, and that is the reason for this bill. When a defibrillator is available, it can mean the difference between life and death. A member of my office staff is a volunteer with St John's Ambulance and assisted at an incident where a young boy had collapsed outside his school. He had no heartbeat. The school had a defibrillator on site, and she assisted a trained staff member as this child, lying on the cold ground in his school uniform, was revived in the third cycle by a combination of a defibrillator and CPR. So that when paramedics arrived, they were met with a living child instead of a scene of unspeakable heartbreak. I'm happy to say that this child recovered and eventually returned to school, but you can imagine how it would have been for his daddy, who was there, trying to reassure his wife over the phone. The heart must be restarted within 3 minutes. And how different it could have been if no defibrillator had been available. I remember very well, Madam Deputy Speaker, when a man collapsed in my own constituency while watching a game of football in the grounds of Portavogie Football Club. He had gone into cardiac arrest when a defibrillator was brought from the clubhouse just a few metres away and applied to him, and on the fourth cycle he began to breathe. This man is alive today because a defibrillator was at his side in seconds, and that is what is so important, that this small machine can restore life, and the benefit is that anyone can use one, because once you open it, its audio instructions tell you exactly what to do. The purpose of this bill is to increase the rates of survival from cardiac arrest by making public access to a defibrillator as quick as possible, because seconds count when the heart stops beating. There are many reasons why a heart suddenly stops working, and this can happen to anyone, even the very young. Is the fact that sudden cardiac death kills 12 people aged 35 and under each week across Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom. And many of these young people who die are involved in physical activities when it happens. While these incidents are indiscriminate, the availability of defibrillators should not be. Of the 30,000 out-of-hospital cardiac arrests across Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom each year, the overall survival rate is a shocking 1 in 10, and it's estimated that public access defibrillators are used in less than 5% of these incidents. So we all should agree and would agree that these are sad statistics. Well, here's an even sadder statistic. There's one that needs mentioned. The British Heart Foundation has reported, and I say this very, very gently, that women are less likely to be given CPR or defibrillation from bystanders than men if they suffer out-of-hospital cardiac arrest in a public place. 68% of women will receive assistance compared to 77% of men, which means that women are less likely to survive even if a defibrillator is readily available, because bystanders are afraid that they might be inappropriately touching the lady. One of the aims of this bill is to educate and remind us all that education and awareness across all of our communities is also urgently needed, because nobody should die for lack of CPR or defibrillation because people are afraid to touch them. The timing of this bill coincides with the intention to include first aid and CPR in the national school curriculum in England in this year 2020. I want to point out that Norway has been teaching CPR in schools for many years. And this has seen bystander CPR cause Norway's survival rates to be as high as 25% compared to less than 10% in the United Kingdom. I know that St John's Ambulance has badgers and cadet schemes for ages 7 to 19 that teaches CPR and use of defibrillators, which means children and young people through this great organisation are learning how to save lives So it makes perfect sense to me to see this training put into place in our schools. I think we in the devolved nations should get on board with this idea, and we should call on our education minister to seriously consider making these life-saving skills part of our children's everyday learning of our schools. This legislation needs to be robust, and it needs to place a requirement on councils to comply. If we can afford to build new buildings and facilities, we can afford to go a few extra £100 and install AEDs. This should be guided by the AED per building or a facility of 7,500 metres square of floor space, and a register must be established to record the location of AEDs and a programme of maintenance and annual testing. I understand that there are now more AEDs installed in public places today than there were when young Oliver King lost his life. This is to be acknowledged and welcome, but we need to go a lot further. We cannot leave the availability of such a life-saving device to be the result of a random decision or a mere recommendation. I know that AEDs are almost always obtained through the efforts of community fundraising. In fact, one was recently installed near my office in Newton Ards by the staff of wardens who raised the money themselves. My humble friend, who's unable to be here today, the member for Sedgefield, has told me about the incredible commitment by one of his constituents, a Mr David Sutton-Lloyd, who made it his mission to see public accessible AEDs installed right across the length and breadth of Newton Aycliffe. These efforts are to be praised, but why does it have to remain incumbent on shop staff and dedicated individuals such as Mr Sutton-Lloyd to purchase AEDs for the safety of others when they don't have to purchase the fire extinguishers or the smoke alarms that public buildings are required by law to have in place? And why should we, as legislators in this House, continue to leave the availability of defibrillators as being arbitrary when we have the figures on how many people die from out-of-hospital cardiac arrest each week, and that tragically many of those people are children? It's easy to listen to the statistics being read out, and sometimes, Madam Deputy Speaker, you can become cold to them and then be shocked and moved by them. But nothing drives home the message more effectively than seeing with your own eyes the miraculous revival of a human life by a defibrillator. I want to ask how many of my honourable friends here today have witnessed a person suddenly collapse and stop breathing. Some have, and many of us probably haven't. But it doesn't matter. Most of you will remember the footage of former Bolton Wanderers player Fabrice Muamba collapsed from cardiac arrest on the pitch during a live broadcast of the match. His heart stopped beating for 78 minutes, but his chances of survival were increased from the start because CPR and a defibrillator was applied during those crucial first few minutes. Such a scene is deeply distressing and a witness, but there is nothing more distressing than the needless loss of life. I call on members today to support and think about that wee boy Oliver King. He was known as Mr Special by his parents. All who knew him and should have turned 21 this year. Also think about my constituent who will celebrate another Christmas this month with his loved ones. The difference in these stories is one thing: a defibrillator, the absence of one and the availability of one. We can no longer leave it to the public to hold raffles or coffee mornings. We must consider it our duty as legislators to require AEDs to be present in public buildings, sporting facilities, places of education, wherever someone, be they young or elderly, might fall down and never get up again. This bill, I believe, Madam Deputy Speaker, can ensure that if they do, they will have every chance of getting up again, and I would urge members to support this 10-minute rule bill. Thank you.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. John Howell, Paul Girvin, David Linden, Carla Lockhart, Maria Eagle, Caroline Noakes, Chris Green, Pauline Nathan, Alison Thulis, Peter Bowen, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson and myself, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Jim Shannon.
Automated External Defibrillators Public Access Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 5th of February 2021.
Friday the 5th of February 2021. Thank you. Thank you. Order. I have now to announce the result of today's deferred division on the draft Veterinary Medicines and Residues Amendment EU Exit Regulations 2020. The ayes were 362, the noes were 202, so the ayes have it. We now come to motion number 2 on agriculture, with which it will be convenient to debate motion number 3 and motion number 4. Minister Victoria Prentice to move.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the draft Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board Amendment Order 2020, which was laid before this House on the 12th of November, be approved. These are the first regulations produced using the powers of the new Agriculture Act. They lay the groundwork for our new agricultural policy. Turning to the first of these SIs, these regulations assign additional functions to the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board. They enable AHDB to collect, manage and make available information regarding the identification, movement and health of animals, and to allocate unique identification codes as a means of identifying animals. This information will feed into a new livestock information service. Of the 165,000 livestock farmers today, nearly 60,000 keep more than one species, and therefore these farmers need to engage with different services and systems. The Livestock Information Service replaces separate species-specific systems with a single portal for keepers to meet their reporting responsibilities. It should be more cost-effective, easier to use, and will allow faster, more accurate livestock traceability. AHDB will also run a unique number identification service on behalf of England and Wales, controlling the issuing of official individual identification numbers to animals. The new system will also allow for value-added services where submitted data can be used to generate information in wider areas such as livestock productivity and disease management. I would be delighted.
Since she mentioned Wales, can I just raise the issue of Welsh lamb? Because obviously if sheep are already pregnant for next year's flock, and we hope that the Welsh hills will be frolicking with lambs, or the lambs will be frolicking all over the hills in the springtime. But the real worry for many Welsh farmers is that they won't be able to sell their product in the rest of the European Union. What plans has the government put in place already to deal with that eventuality if 50% of the product which is presently goes to the European Union is not able to be sold?
Minister.
Well, it's a delight to take an intervention from the honourable gentleman, though I have to say it is not absolutely on point with this SI, but it's always a delight to talk about Welsh lamb. And I am still very hopeful that we will get a zero tariff deal with the European Union, and that would be a good outcome for Welsh lamb. If, in the event that we do not get such a deal, the honourable gentleman knows, I hope, that over previous planning for no-deal exit, we have worked up various schemes, and I would like to assure the honourable gentleman that I'm sure, if needed, those can be got out and worked up once again. Turning back, if I may, to these SIs, this new traceability system, which will be available for sheep in the future, will allow us better to manage disease, which is what we're talking about. We're not, in fact, talking about deals or no deals at the moment. We're talking about management of disease of lambs, Welsh or otherwise. And it should also enable us to protect human health, giving confidence to trading partners, with whom we hope we'll be able to trade, and will enable better use of data to manage on-farm productivity and efficiency. Turning now to the direct payments SI, the legislation governing direct payment schemes contains financial ceilings which are used to calculate direct payments to farmers. However, the legislation only includes financial ceilings up to and including the 2020 claim year. These regulations specify how the Secretary of State will set financial ceilings for England beyond the end of this year. These regulations also make minor changes to ensure the schemes continue to work effectively in England beyond 2020. This includes replacing dates specific to the 2020 scheme year with equivalent dates which are not year-specific. The regulations also remove rules which are not relevant to England, such as those relating to voluntary coupled support. No substantive policy changes are made by these regulations. They ensure the continuity of direct payments in England beyond the end of this year and are largely technical. Farmers will see no change on the ground as a result of them. The Government remains committed to beginning to phase out direct payments from 2021 as part of its ambitious agricultural reforms in England. We will bring forward separate legislation to make these changes. Direct payment schemes fall within devolved competence. The DAs plan to make their own legislation in relation to direct payment schemes in their own territories. Turning now to the WTO SI, the World Trade Organization's Agreement on Agriculture divides domestic support into green, blue or amber, depending on the support's potential to distort trade. Under the agreement, each country must limit the amount of trade-distorting amber box domestic support given to agricultural producers. The UK's overall amber box spend limit remains unchanged after EU exit. These regulations specify the amount of amber box payments that may be given in each country of the UK. These limits have been set at a level that will not constrain policy choices, meaning that there should be no impact on farmers. The regulations also outline the procedure for classifying such schemes and permit the Secretary of State to request information from the DAs where this is needed to enable the UK to satisfy its obligations under the Agreement on Agriculture. In total, Madam Deputy Speaker, these statutory instruments implement provisions provided for by the Agriculture Act. In the case of direct payments, they provide important and necessary continuity for farmers. I urge members to agree to these regulations, which I commend to the House.
The question is, as on the order paper, Shadow Minister Daniel Zeitler.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to be here and to speak to these instruments, and they are indeed an eclectic mix of instruments, and I should say at the outset that we will not be opposing them, and particularly on the Agricultural and Horticultural Development Board. Can I say something positive about them? I know they're not always supported throughout the sector, but my experience has been very positive, and I think they do